Greetings, fellow fans. You're tuned into Omni Wizard presenting to you today What If Harry Potter Was Raised by Wonder Woman on the Themyscira? Show some love by liking and subscribing. Enjoy the story ahead. Chapter 1, The Shore of Second Chances. The sky above Godric's Hollow was the kind of wrong that weather couldn't explain. It wasn't storming, it was grieving. The clouds sat too low and too still, the way clouds only do when something beneath them has broken the natural order of things. No wind moved through the village square. The jack-o'-lanterns that had burned cheerfully on every doorstep an hour ago had guttered out one by one, as if the darkness preferred to do its work without witnesses. Diana felt it before she crossed the boundary of the village. She had been running patrol along the southern coast of man's world, a habit she developed over years of watching the horizon for things that didn't belong when the pulse hit her. Not a sound, not a light, something older than either. A wave of magic so concentrated, so saturated with grief and sacrifice and love, that it had punched through dimensional space like a fist through paper and rattled the foundations of Themyscira itself. She had felt her mother snap upright from her throne 300 miles away. She had felt the island's ancient wards shiver. She had moved toward it the way she always moved toward things that mattered, without hesitation and very fast. Godric's Hollow was quiet in the way that meant people were behind their curtains pretending they hadn't heard anything. She came down in the lane at the edge of the village and walked, because running drew attention and she needed a moment to understand what she was walking into. The magic in the air was dense and layered. She could read it the way a sailor reads weather. There was death here, recent and violent, and beneath the death there was something else. Something that had no right to be as warm as it felt. The house at the end of the lane had half a wall missing. She stood at the garden gate and looked at it, upper story blown outward, roof sagging, the front door hanging open on one hinge like a broken jaw, no fire, which surprised her. Whatever had happened here had been surgical in its destruction, targeted, specific. A killing room, not a burning one. She went in. The ground floor was largely intact. A sitting room with an overturned toy broomstick on the floor. A kitchen with a mug still half full of tea gone cold. She moved through it all without touching anything, reading the space, and then she went up the stairs, stepping over the places where the structure had weakened. The man was in the hallway. He'd died fighting. She could see it in the way he'd fallen, the wand still loose in his hand, the set of his shoulders even in death. He'd turned to face whatever came through the door. Hadn't run. She stood over him for a moment, the old warrior's respect moving through her quietly, and then she went to the room beyond. The woman was at the foot of the crib. Same thing, died facing the door. Died standing between whatever came in and whoever was in that crib. Diana had seen thousands of years of war and she knew what a last stand looked like. She crouched beside the woman and looked at her face, red-haired, young, so young, and felt something in her chest tighten with a grief she had no right to claim for a woman she'd never met. Then the sound came from the crib. Not crying exactly. More like the sound a person makes when they're trying very hard not to cry and their body hasn't learned the trick of it yet. Small and hitching and fierce in a way that made no sense for something that small to be fierce. Diana stood. She looked into the crib. The boy looked back at her. He was perhaps a year old, round-faced, dark-haired, and he was looking at her, not the unfocused gaze of a baby but the direct, assessing look of someone taking inventory. There was a cut on his forehead, fresh and lightning-shaped, and the blood from it had tracked down into his eyebrow, and he seemed to find the whole situation deeply unsatisfactory. His lower lip wobbled once. He decided against whatever that had been. His green eyes, the greenest eyes she'd ever seen, and she had known Amazons who could stop rivers with a glance, stayed fixed on her face. She reached in and picked him up. He grabbed her thumb with both hands. His grip was remarkable. "Hello," she said, because it seemed right to introduce yourself. He made a sound that was clearly a response, something declarative and opinionated. She had absolutely no idea what it meant, but she felt, with the certainty that had never once failed her, that it mattered. She looked around the room. She looked at the woman on the floor. She looked at the boy in her arms, who was studying her face with the focused intensity of a scholar encountering a new text. She could hear things outside now, distant pops of apparition, raised voices, people coming. The magical world was stirring, which meant decisions needed to be made quickly. She knew enough about the wizarding world to know that they had their own hierarchies, their own authorities, their own ways of dealing with their own crises. She knew that somewhere an old man with a long beard was already calculating where this child should go. She looked at the cut on the boy's forehead. She looked at his mother behind her. She looked at his eyes, which were still locked on hers as if he'd decided she was the most interesting thing in the room and saw no reason to revise that assessment. "I'm going to take you somewhere safe," she said. "Is that all right?" He grabbed her thumb harder. She took that as a yes. She was in the air before the first wizard apparated into the lane below. Themyscira greeted the dawn with its usual complete indifference to drama. The island existed outside of time in the way that places of great age sometimes do, ancient enough that individual years had stopped mattering, enduring enough that even remarkable events took a few generations to fully impress themselves upon the stone and the sea and the women who kept watch on the walls. When Diana landed on the eastern shore with a 1-year-old boy wrapped in her arms and a look on her face that her sisters had learned to read as "Do not ask me to explain this yet," the island absorbed the moment with the equanimity of something that had seemed considerably stranger. Philippus, captain of the royal guard, took one look at the child and then at Diana and then back at the child. "Whose is he? His parents are dead." Diana adjusted the boy, who had fallen asleep somewhere over the Atlantic with the absolute conviction of someone who had decided he was in competent hands and could afford to rest. "His name is Harry. Diana, I'll speak to mother." Hippolyta was in the throne room, which meant she'd been awake all night. She stood when Diana entered, not in ceremony but in the particular way she stood when she was managing strong emotion by giving it a physical direction. Her eyes went to the sleeping child. Her expression cycled through approximately 7 things in about 2 seconds and settled on something careful and still. "Tell me," she said. Diana told her. All of it, the pulse of magic that had torn through the world's membrane, the village, the house, the parents, the boy with the cut on his forehead and the grip like a young warrior who hadn't yet learned what his hands could do. She told her about the warmth in the magic, the impossible warmth of it, the sense that something had happened in that room that had no business being survivable. When she finished, Hippolyta was quiet for a long time. She looked at Harry, who had woken during the telling and was now sitting up in Diana's arms staring at the throne room with eyes that missed nothing. "He is a wizard's child," Hippolyta said. "It wasn't a question. Yes, their world will look for him. Yes, Diana." Hippolyta's voice was soft with the specific softness she used when she was about to say something she knew wouldn't land easily. "He has a world. He has a world that got his parents killed and has a monster in it who will come for him again." Diana met her mother's eyes. "He has no one, mother. I felt what happened in that room. His mother burned herself up to protect him. She poured everything she had into him and it worked, and now she's gone and he is here and he is looking at your throne like he's already calculating how to climb it." They both looked at Harry. Harry was, in fact, gripping Diana's bracer and leaning toward the throne with the focused determination of someone with a plan. Hippolyta made a sound that was absolutely not a laugh, pressed her lips together and looked away. "He stays," she said, "for now. We will see." For now lasted 11 years. No one on the Themyscira was particularly surprised. Harry learned to walk on marble floors that had been smoothed by 3,000 years of feet, and he learned to run on beaches where the sand was so white it hurt to look at in full sun, and he learned to climb on the sea cliffs at the island's eastern edge where the rock was warm and porous and generous with handholds. He learned language the way children do, by drowning in it, thrashing around, and eventually discovering he could swim. Greek first, then the old tongue of the Amazons, which wasn't quite Greek and wasn't quite anything else. And then English, which Diana spoke to him from the beginning because she knew he'd need it, and because she liked the look on his face when 2 languages clicked together into meaning. He learned history sitting cross-legged on the floor of the great library while the scholar Ayla read to him from texts so old that the ink had faded to shadows on the page, and he learned to ask questions that embarrassed the scholars, which delighted him and which Diana chose not to discourage. He learned to fight. This was perhaps the most significant thing. The Amazons did not train gently. They trained with the understanding that the world was not gentle, and that sending someone into it under-equipped was a form of cruelty. Harry was 7 when Philippus first put a training sword in his hand, a blunted thing his size, and showed him the grip. He was 8 when he disarmed his first sparring partner, an Amazon who had been training for 60 years and who told the story at dinner with the particular pride of someone describing the accomplishment of something they'd had a hand in creating. He was 9 when it stopped being remarkable and started simply being Harry, the boy who moved like water and thought like a tactician and hit, when he hit, with a precision that had nothing to do with size. The magic came alongside all of it, woven through rather than separate. He'd made things happen since he was small. A shattered cup rebuilding itself from shards on the floor. A stuck door swinging open when he looked at it with sufficient irritation. The time at age 5 when he'd been chased by a particularly aggressive goat and appeared suddenly on top of a wall 8 feet up without any memory of climbing. Diana watched all of it with the steady attention she gave to everything important, and she talked to him about it the way she talked to him about everything directly without making it strange. "It's part of what you are," she told him, sitting on the cliff edge at sunset, the ocean going red and gold below them. He was 6. "Your parents were magical. Your world, your first world, is full of people who use it. Can the Amazons use it? Some forms, the gods gave us gifts of their own. But what you have is different." She looked at him sideways. "It comes from inside you like a muscle. He'd spent the next week trying to flex things. Some of it worked, some of it spectacularly didn't. He set 3 training dummies on fire, levitated himself into a ceiling, and caused a minor flood in the East bathhouse. Philippus was remarkably patient about all of it. She simply started factoring it into his training. By the time he was 10, he was doing it consciously, not in the precise, wand-focused way of wizards, but in a broader, more instinctive way, magic and physicality blurring together into something that was uniquely his. He could throw a net of force that crumpled a sparring dummy at 20 feet. He could sense magic nearby the way some people could sense approaching rain. In the water, which he loved with a passion that was slightly unreasonable, he'd once stayed under for 20 minutes and had come up to find Philippus on the shore looking like she'd aged 10 years. He was not by any measure a typical child. He was also, and this was the thing Diana had been most deliberate about, not an arrogant one. "Tell me who you are," she said to him regularly, not as a quiz, as a practice. The way the Amazons recited lineage, not to boast but to remember. "Harry James Potter," he'd say, "son of James and Lily Potter, ward of Diana of Themyscira, prince of this island by adoption and choice." Then, because he'd been 8 when he first added this part and had never taken it out, "And I'm the one who's going to climb that wall before breakfast tomorrow." Diana never corrected the last part. It was always true anyway. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Harry found it on the breakfast table, real parchment, sealed in green wax, addressed in emerald ink in a hand that was somehow both hurried and precise. He picked it up and read the address on the front. Mr. H. Potter, the East Terrace, Royal Residence, Themyscira. He turned it over. The seal showed a badger, an eagle, a lion, and a snake arranged around a letter H. He brought it to Diana, who was on the training field running drills with Philippus's unit. She read it, read it again, handed it back to him. "Hogwarts," she said. The word sat in her mouth like something she'd been expecting for a long time. "School," he said, "for wizards. For people like you, yes." She looked at him. "I always knew this was coming. Are you going to tell me I can't go?" The look she gave him was the look she reserved for questions that didn't deserve the dignity of a direct answer. "Of course not. This is part of your world, Harry. Your magic needs to be trained properly. What you and I have been doing is instinct and improvisation. You need structure too." She paused. "I want you to understand what you're walking into, though. Tell me." She sat on the field wall and he sat beside her, and she told him about the wizarding world. Not everything she knew. She wasn't certain she knew everything there was to know, but the shape of it. The community hidden inside the larger world. The politics and the prejudices. The war that had ended the night his parents died, and the man, the thing at the center of it, and what that thing had done to his family. He listened the way he always listened, completely with his eyes on her face, not interrupting. When she finished, he said, "He killed my parents." "Yes. And then something went wrong and he lost his body." "Yes. But he's not gone." Diana was quiet for a moment. "I don't think so." Harry looked out at the sea. His face was doing the thing it did when he was processing something, not blank exactly, but turned inward. All the energy that usually played across his expression pulled down into somewhere deeper. Then it came back and his eyes came back to her and they were clear. "Right," he said. "When do I go?" Hippolyta insisted on a farewell feast, which Harry bore with the good grace of someone who knew better than to argue with a queen about hospitality. He sat at the high table between Diana and Philippus and ate things he'd been eating his whole life, and looked around at the faces of women who had shaped him. His teachers, his sparring partners, the scholars who'd answered his 1,000 questions. The guard who'd once fished him out of the eastern tide pool at age 4, and called him a troublesome little sea creature with the particular warmth of someone who meant it as a compliment. Ayla, ancient and small and fierce, pressed both his hands in hers before he left the table. "You will make them uncomfortable," she told him in Greek. "Good, comfort is the first enemy of growth." Philippus clasped his forearm in the warrior's grip and he returned it without hesitation. "Keep your guard up," she said, "both kinds." Hippolyta waited until last. She held his face in her hands, grandmother steady, and looked at him for a long time with the expression of someone reading a text they have memorized but still love to revisit. "You are an Amazon prince," she said. "You are a wizard's son. Both of these are true. Neither of them is the whole truth." Her thumbs moved briefly against his cheekbones. "Now go and find the rest." He hugged her. He'd always been unembarrassed about that. The Amazons had raised him past the peculiar male discomfort with tenderness, and then he stepped back and squared his shoulders. "All right," he said. "You will," she agreed in the tone of someone for whom this was not a request. Diana came with him as far as London. They arrived 2 days before September 1st, which gave them time. She'd written ahead. She had contacts in man's world who could navigate the strangeness of the wizarding economy. And a Gringotts account had been confirmed in Harry's name. The Potter family vault awaiting. She'd also, in the months since the letter, been quietly collecting information about what Harry was walking into. She was thorough. She was always thorough. Diagon Alley revealed itself when Diana tapped the correct bricks at the leaky cauldron's back wall and Harry stepped through it and stopped. The alley was extraordinary. It was noise and color, and the smell of things burning and boiling and fermenting and the deep dry smell of old books and the sweeter smell of pastry and something underneath all of it, a low-grade hum barely there that was magic working in layers like harmonics. He stood in the entrance for 5 seconds absorbing it. Then he walked in. He moved through Gringotts with the particular quality of stillness that came from growing up around beings far more powerful than himself, and learning that the correct response to impressive things was respect, not awe. The goblins watched him with their sharp black eyes, and he met their eyes evenly and said please and thank you and gave his name clearly without the particular squirm that seemed to affect most humans in their presence. The account manager Ragnarok paused at one point in the transaction and looked at him differently, just slightly, the way someone does when a thing doesn't fit their expectations. Harry noticed. He said nothing, he filed it. The vault was extraordinary in its own way, stacked high with gold and old objects, the inheritance of a family he was only beginning to know. He stood in it for a moment and felt the particular gravity of it. Generations of Potters, his father, his mother, people who had loved him and who were gone. He picked up a galleon, turned it in his fingers, set it back. He took what he needed and no more. Ollivander's was dim and cluttered and smelled of wood shavings and something resinous and ancient. The old man behind the counter, white-haired, pale-eyed, with the focused look of someone whose entire personality had resolved into a single narrow channel of expertise, measured him without speaking and then began pulling boxes. 15 wands. Each one he picked up produced something, a small wind, a scatter of sparks, a groan from the shelves, but nothing that felt like right. Harry felt each one clearly, the way he felt magic in general, not as an idea but as a physical sensation, a texture, a temperature. These were close but not quite, like sparring with someone who was good but not someone who could actually push you. The 16th box was different. He could feel it before Ollivander opened it. Holly, 11 inches, Phoenix Feather Core. He picked it up and the wand did something none of the others had done. It went quiet, not the bang and flash of the others' failures. It went perfectly deeply quiet, like a room when everyone in it has stopped talking at once and suddenly you can hear the house breathing. Warmth moved up his arm. His magic, which had always felt like something he was managing, settled. He looked at the wand. The wand, if a wand could be said to do anything, looked back. Ollivander was very still. Curious, he said. I've been told that before, Harry said pleasantly. What's curious? The phoenix whose feather is in that wand gave only 2 feathers. Ollivander's pale eyes were intent. Its other feather is in the wand that gave you that scar. Harry turned the wand once in his fingers, looked at the cut on his forehead in the dark shop window's reflection faded now to a thin silver line, looked back at Ollivander. Brothers, he said. Yes. Good, Harry said. Then we understand each other already. He set the galleons on the counter. Thank you, Mr. Ollivander. This is excellent work. He left the old man looking after him with an expression that was approximately 70% unease and 30% fascination. They had ice cream after, Diana and Harry side by side on the Florian Fortescue terrace, watching the alley's Saturday afternoon foot traffic. Harry was working through a bowl of something with blackberries and listening to the world around him the way he'd been taught to listen in unfamiliar terrain. Cataloging. Lots of staring, he noted. You have a famous scar, Diana said. I've had it my whole life and no one stared on Themyscira. No one on Themyscira knew what it meant. He touched it briefly, reflexive, then stopped himself. Does it bother you that they'll treat me like something that happened to them? Diana ate a spoonful of her ice cream and considered this with the seriousness she gave to all genuine questions. What bothers me, she said carefully, is when people's idea of who you are prevents them from seeing who you actually are. But you can't control other people's ideas. You can only control what you show them. Harry looked at a family across the alley, 2 parents and 2 red-haired children, all in robes, the parents consulting a list. Normal, comfortable. The kind of ordinary he'd never had and had never exactly wanted and didn't quite know how to evaluate. What if I don't fit, he said. It was the quietest question he'd asked all day. It cost more than the others. Diana put her hand over his on the table. Harry, when have you ever fit? You were the only child on an island of immortal warriors. You have always not fit and you have always found your way. She squeezed once. This will be no different. He turned his hand over and squeezed back. Unless they put me in a terrible house, he said. What was it called? Hufflepuff? Is it as bad as it sounds? I have no idea. I don't think it matters. Right, probably doesn't. He ate the last of his ice cream, though I'd prefer the lion one. Why? Because Philippus would like it best. Diana laughed, the real one, the one she didn't perform, the one that came out when she wasn't thinking about it. He almost made it through the alley without incident. The boy appeared near Madame Malkin's, blonde, pale, robes already fitted, with the posture of someone who had been told since birth that the world's correct orientation was toward him. He had two large boys flanking him and the kind of easy contempt for his surroundings that came not from disinterest, but from deep investment in performing disinterest. He spotted Harry's scar before Harry spotted him. "Merlin's beard," the boy said loudly to no one in particular. Are you Harry Potter?" Harry looked at him. "I am." The blond boy processed this with the speed of someone recalibrating a social encounter mid-flight. He straightened slightly. "I'm Draco Malfoy." He said it in the way people say things they expect to matter. "Hello," Harry said pleasantly. Draco waited for the recognition. It didn't come. Harry's expression was the expression of someone who was being polite, attentive, and not remotely impressed, and this seemed to be confusing to Draco in a way that showed around his eyes. "You'll find," Draco said, pivoting to the version of this conversation that assumed authority, "that some wizarding families are better to know than others. At Hogwarts, who you're aligned with matters." "I imagine it does to some people," Harry said. Something flickered in Draco's expression. "My father says the Dark Lord will rise again. And when he does, your father's opinion about the Dark Lord doesn't affect my plans," Harry said. His voice was easy, not rude, just definitive, the voice of someone closing a chapter of a book. "I hope you have a good rest of your afternoon, Draco." He turned and walked away. Diana fell in beside him without comment. She had been watching the whole exchange from 6 feet back, in the way she watched everything fully without intervention, trusting him to handle it. "That could have gone worse," Harry said. "It could have gone considerably better. You think I should have made friends with him. I think you learned nothing about him just now except what he wanted you to know." She glanced sideways at him. "Remember what Ayla says about texts. You can't judge a book by reading the cover page." He thought about this. "You think he's worth knowing? I think everyone is worth understanding." She paused. "Understanding and trusting are different things." He nodded, turning this over. It was the way all the best lessons from Themyscira worked. They sounded simple, and then you kept finding new angles in them for years. Behind them, Draco Malfoy was very still in the middle of Diagon Alley, watching them go, with an expression that had too many things in it to name easily. The night before September 1st, they stayed in London. Diana had taken rooms in a hotel near King's Cross, real rooms, not magical ones. They sat on the small balcony in the evening, watching the city's lights come on one by one below them, and talked the way they'd always talked, about everything and nothing, topics spiraling outward and back, her certainty and his curiosity braiding together the way they always had. At some point the conversation ran down, not because there was nothing left to say, but because what was left didn't need words. The city hummed below them. Harry's wand was in his pocket, and he kept reaching for it the way he kept reaching for new things, not to use it but to hold it, to feel the weight of something that was genuinely, specifically his. "I'm not going to tell you to be careful," Diana said finally. "You'll be careful because you're intelligent and you were trained by people who understood stakes." But he heard the but. "But this world," she paused, "it has broken things in it, not just the obvious evil, smaller breaks. Systems and people that have settled into patterns they shouldn't have settled into. Prejudice that has calcified into policy. Power that protects itself instead of the people it should serve." She looked at him. "Don't let those things make you cynical, and don't let them make you compliant." "I'm not great at compliant," he said. "I know." She was quiet. "I want you to be kind, Harry, as well as strong. Kindness is not weakness, you know this." "I know, and I want you to write to me actual letters, not brief ones." "You'll know if things are wrong before I write anything," he said. "You always do." "That is not the point," she said, with a look that was so entirely the face of a parent that he had to look away to keep from laughing. "I'll write," he said. "Long ones, multiple pages, lots of detail." "Thank you." He leaned back in his chair and looked at the city and then up at the sky where the stars were fighting gamely against the light pollution and mostly losing. "Do you think it was fate?" he said. "You finding me that night?" She considered it without rushing. Diana never rushed the questions that mattered. "I think the magic that saved you was your mother's. I think it was strong enough to reach across the world because she was extraordinary and because love that complete doesn't stay contained." She turned her glass in her hands. "Whether that brought me specifically to that house, I don't know. I've seen enough of the gods' work to know they favor coincidences that suit them. So maybe Aphrodite was involved. Entirely possible. She does love a dramatic reunion. We'd never met before. She doesn't care about details like that." Harry laughed, the full one, the loud one, the one Philippus always said could be heard from the training field wall. Diana smiled into her glass. It was the last evening of the life they'd built together, and neither of them said so, but they both knew it. Things that are ending have a quality to them, a particular density, a tendency to stay in memory with more clarity than ordinary time. Harry felt it and let himself feel it, because Diana had taught him that emotions were information, not embarrassment. He was scared a little. He was ready considerably more. He was the son of Lily and James Potter. He was the ward of Diana of Themyscira. He was the boy who had sparred with immortals before he could read. He was going to a school for wizards in a world that had been waiting for him, which had absolutely no idea what it had been waiting for. The city glittered below him. Somewhere across it, a train station stood ready. Somewhere beyond that, an ancient castle sat on a Scottish hillside, with its lights beginning to come on in towers that had been lit for 1,000 years. Harry closed his hand around his wand in his pocket. He went to bed. He slept well. He was always good at sleeping before a new thing. Diana had made sure of it, taught him that rest was not surrender but preparation, that the body that arrives rested arrives ready, and that readiness was the only real answer to uncertainty. The morning would come, the train would leave, the world would introduce itself. He was ready to introduce himself back. Chapter 2. The world introduces itself. Platform 9 and 3/4 existed in the confident way that secrets do. When they've been kept so long they've stopped worrying about being found out. Harry stepped through the barrier at a walk, not a run, not a hesitant shuffle, just a purposeful stride, and the platform opened up around him like a held breath releasing. Steam billowed from the scarlet engine in great warm clouds that smelled of coal and something older, something that had no name in the non-magical world. Families crowded the platform in various states of organized chaos. Owls complained from their cages. A cat yowled. 2 boys near the front of the train were arguing about something with the wholehearted investment of people who would forget what they were arguing about by dinner. He stood for a moment and let the noise settle around him. The Hogwarts Express was magnificent. He'd seen older things. Themyscira had architecture that made this engine look like a toy, but there was something about the way it sat on the tracks, red and definitive and ready, that appealed to him. It knew what it was for. Harry respected that in anything. Diana was behind him on the non-magical side of the barrier. She couldn't come through. She had explained this practically without sentiment, which was how she handled the things that had sentiment in them, whether she acknowledged it or not. He had hugged her at the barrier. A real one, not the public appropriate kind. She had held on for exactly 3 seconds longer than was strictly necessary and then let go and looked at him with the expression that meant go, and be what I raised you to be. He'd gone. Now he stood on the platform with his trunk on a trolley and Nyx, his tawny owl, named after the goddess of night because he'd been 9 when he got her and had thought this was extremely cool, and at 11 still thought so, shifting on her perch, watching the crowd with amber-eyed aristocratic contempt. He pushed the trolley toward the train and started looking for a compartment. He found one near the middle of the train, empty, which was increasingly rare as the platform thinned and students boarded. He stowed his trunk, settled Nyx's cage on the rack, sat down by the window and watched the platform. The red-haired family he'd seen in Diagon Alley was there, fully assembled now, which apparently meant 6 red-haired people in various states of size, and a small girl with identical red hair who was clearly arguing about something with her mother, while 2 older boys, twins, he thought, from the synchronized quality of their grins, conducted what appeared to be a minor smuggling operation near the luggage rack. There was a younger boy, about Harry's age, hanging slightly back from all of it with the expression of someone who was used to being one of many and was working out what it meant to be set apart for the first time. The train lurched. The platform began to move. Harry watched the red-haired mother running alongside and then falling behind, and then the platform was gone and Britain was outside the window, gray-green fields, hedgerows, the occasional bridge over water brown with autumn. He settled back in his seat and pulled out a book. He'd bought a stack of wizarding texts in Diagon Alley and had spent the remaining August burning through them with the focused hunger he brought to all new knowledge. He was deep in magical theory when the compartment door opened. The red-haired boy from the platform stood in the doorway, looking slightly embarrassed in the way of someone who has been searching compartments for 10 minutes and has run out of other options. He was tall for 11, freckled, with an ink stain on his left cuff and the robes of someone who'd inherited them from someone slightly different in build. "Everywhere else is full," he said. "Is it all right if I sit wherever you like?" Harry said. The boy sat across from him with the careful posture of someone trying not to take up too much space. He glanced at the book, glanced at Nyx, glanced at Harry's forehead in the instinctive way everyone did, then immediately looked away. "I'm Ron," he said. "Ron Weasley. Harry Potter." Ron blinked. His eyes went to the scar again, less surreptitiously this time, and then he seemed to make a conscious decision about something. "My brothers are convinced you'll be this, I don't know, huge deal. Loads of people talking about it." "People talk," Harry said. "Doesn't bother you?" Harry looked up from his book. Considered the question because it deserved consideration. "It would bother me if their talking was accurate," he said. "Most of it won't be." Ron thought about this. He was quiet in the comfortable way some people are, not performing quietness, just naturally at ease with gaps in conversation. Harry liked this immediately. Themyscira had taught him the value of people who didn't rush to fill silence. Are you actually? I mean, everyone says you barely exist, like no one knew where you were. Ron was doing the thing where he couldn't decide whether to ask the question but couldn't stop himself either. Where were you? Greece, Harry said. Technically true, mostly true, with family. My guardian, he paused. She's the closest thing to family I have, yes. Ron absorbed this with the empathy of someone from a large family who had probably never had trouble answering the same question and knew better than to press on an answer that had edges in it. She let you come though, that's good. She understood why I needed to. Harry set the book down. 6 brothers and sisters. 6 brothers, Ron said, with a slight gravity that suggested this had been its own education. And Ginny, she's younger, 7 of us altogether. He seemed to decide something. It's, great, it's great. It's just a lot of everyone's already done everything, haven't they? Bill was head boy, Charlie was Quidditch captain, Percy's a prefect. Fred and George are Fred and George, he stopped. Sorry, you don't need to hear about my family. I don't mind, Harry said, and meant it. I grew up around a lot of women who'd each done extraordinary things before I was born. You learn to find your own lane. Ron stared at him. A lot of women, Harry smiled. It's a long story. The witch with the food trolley came and Harry bought an enormous quantity of every wizarding sweet he didn't recognize, which was most of them, and spread them across the compartment seat in the systematic way he approached any unknown quantity. Ron watched this with increasing delight and offered identifications, and somehow between the birdie bots and the chocolate frogs they were talking the way people talk when they've decided, without saying so, that they're going to be friends. Harry found the chocolate frogs philosophically interesting. It's a trading card situation, he said, reading the back of Dumbledore's card. Inside a product that moves. Whoever designed this was either a genius or had a very strange afternoon. You get doubles all the time, Ron said. I've got about 6 Agrippas. Do wizards collect these seriously? Some do. Fred and George trade them for. Actually, you don't want to know what Fred and George trade them for. Harry laughed. Ron seemed pleasantly surprised by this, the way people are when someone laughs at something they said and they hadn't been entirely sure it was funny. The compartment door opened again. The girl was small and bushy-haired and moving with the energy of someone on a specific mission that she expected to complete efficiently. She had a book under one arm and the expression of someone who was used to knowing things and was prepared to be useful with that knowledge on short notice. Has anyone seen a toad? A boy named Neville's lost his. Oh, she stopped, having arrived at the table and looked at Harry properly. Her expression cycled through recognition and recalibration and then settled on something that was clearly trying very hard to be normal. You're Harry Potter. Still true, Harry said. I'm Hermione Granger. She said it with the slight over-articulation of someone who had been mispronouncing other people's names and had learned to say their own very clearly. I've read about you, of course. A great deal in modern magical history and the rise and fall of the dark arts and, well, several texts. She seemed to realize she was still standing in the door. May I sit? Just while I ask, I'm still looking for the toad, but sit, Harry said. She sat. She looked at the spread of sweets. She looked at the book Harry had set aside. Magical theory, we don't cover that until 3rd year. I know I bought ahead. So did I, she said this with the precise satisfaction of someone discovering they are not, as they'd feared, alone. Did you read A History of Magic? Twice. Bathilda Bagshot is a better historian than she is a writer. The bones are excellent, but she overloads the connective tissue. Hermione stared at him. It was a different kind of stare from Ron's, or from Draco Malfoy's, or from everyone on the platform. It was the stare of someone who has just heard their own private thought come out of someone else's mouth. I wrote exactly that in the margin, she said. Which page? 47, the chapter on the medieval statute of secrecy's precursor legislation. Yes, he looked at her steadily. What did you think of her argument about Merlin? And that was it. They were off, and Ron sat between them, eating every flavor beans, and interjecting occasionally, and looking between them with the particular expression of someone watching a tennis match that was moving slightly too fast to fully follow, but that was still tremendously entertaining. Harry registered 2 things in the next 20 minutes. Hermione Granger was the first person his age he'd met who pushed back on ideas instead of deferring to them, and she did it with zero interest in whether he found it comfortable. He found it enormously comfortable. He'd grown up on Themyscira, where every Amazon from Philippus to the youngest guard considered it a personal failure to agree with something they didn't actually agree with. The toad, they eventually found, had relocated to the luggage rack of a compartment 2 down, where it was making the acquaintance of a terrified garden spider. Hermione retrieved it. The boy Neville, round-faced, soft-voiced, with the look of someone who expected to be in moderate trouble at any given moment and had made a kind of peace with this, thanked her with the relief of someone who had been told the toad was good luck and feared what losing it implied. Harry looked at the toad when Neville was introduced to him. What's his name? Trevor, Neville said in the way of someone expecting this to be judged. Good name, Harry said. I had a turtle on at home, named after a goddess. It's a fine tradition naming creatures after significant things. Neville blinked. Really, can I hold him? Neville held out Trevor with the careful hands of someone passing along something important. Trevor sat in Harry's palm and looked at him with the flat, inscrutable expression of a toad, and Harry looked back. He's calm, Harry said. He's always calm with people he likes, Neville said, and seemed surprised to hear himself say it as if he'd revealed something private. Then he looked at Harry's hands, the calluses, the way he held things, some quality in the steadiness of it, and seemed to relax incrementally. Harry handed Trevor back. You'll do well here, he told Neville in the tone of a statement rather than a comfort, because comforts were sometimes dishonest and statements were usually more useful. Neville looked at him. He clearly didn't entirely believe it. But he looked like he wanted to, which Harry thought was a reasonable start. The castle appeared through the rain like something that had always been there and had been waiting for the world to grow up around it. Harry stood in one of the boats with Ron and Hermione and a girl named Lavender who joined their flotilla at some point, and looked up at Hogwarts as it grew larger above them, and felt the thing he rarely felt, the slight contraction of breath that meant something was genuinely, unexpectedly larger than anticipated. It was old. Not just old in years, but old in a way that had weight to it, the weight of accumulated lives, of thousands of people who had come here and learned things and carried them out into the world. He could feel the magic in the stones from the water. It was deep and layered like Themyscira, but where Themyscira's magic was the clean eternal magic of the gods, this was the accumulated magic of human centuries, complicated and rich and slightly unpredictable in the way that human things always were. Blimey, Ron said softly. Yes, Harry agreed. Hagrid, enormous, bearded, gentle in the way that very large things are sometimes gentle, with a voice like a very friendly avalanche, led them up from the boats and through a door and into a stone corridor where they waited, damp and slightly stunned, for whatever came next. Harry had been in the company of physically formidable people his entire life and still found himself recalibrating to Hagrid. He'd met the man in passing in Diagon Alley during the Gringotts' visit, large, warm, immediately kind in a way that was not performance but character. He hadn't asked Hagrid about his parents. He'd thought about it. But the platform had not been the place for that conversation. Professor McGonagall arrived, tartan robes, precise posture, the bearing of someone who had decided a long time ago what she was about and had been consistently right. She looked at the assembled first-years with the evaluative patience of a woman who had done this many times and still took each iteration seriously. Her eyes passed over Harry and came back for one extra half-second before moving on. You'll be sorted into your houses shortly, she told them. Your house will be your family. How does it work? Harry asked. Not interrupting exactly, he'd asked in the brief pause before she continued, which on Themyscira was considered the correct window and apparently in Scotland was slightly more ambiguous. McGonagall looked at him. The sorting hat evaluates each student and determines which house. Evaluates how? Her mouth tightened fractionally. Not in irritation, he thought, more in the specific recalibration of a teacher meeting a student who was going to ask questions during the answers to previous questions. That becomes clear when you experience it, Mr. Potter, a beat. I'm glad to see you arrived safely. It was a strange thing to say, he filed it. The ghosts swept through the wall, pearlescent, dramatic, arguing with each other about something, and half the corridor screamed. Harry watched them with interested calm. He'd been on Themyscira, where things considerably more unnerving than translucent former humans wandered the deeper parts of the island. Ghosts were just people who hadn't finished yet. The Great Hall was everything the approach promised. 4 long tables, a staff table at the far end, candles floating without apparent mechanism in their thousands, and a ceiling that wasn't a ceiling, it was the sky or the best illusion of the sky he'd ever seen, heavy clouds and the occasional gap where stars were visible. He looked at it for a moment longer than anything else. Diana had told him about this. She'd read it somewhere and described it. Knowing about it and seeing it were different. The sorting hat sat on a stool and began to sing. Harry listened to the song with attention. It was as a piece of musical composition, functional at best, but the content was useful, the 4 houses, their qualities, the general scheme of things. He catalogued it and moved on. The sorting went alphabetically, which meant he had some time to watch. Hermione went to Gryffindor with the hat barely touching her head, which surprised no one who'd spent 4 hours in her company. Neville went to Gryffindor, looking stunned and relieved in equal measure. Draco Malfoy went to Slytherin before the hat had fully settled, which struck Harry as either very straightforward or very predetermined. Ron went to Gryffindor. The hat paused on him not long, but Harry caught the slight tension in Ron's shoulders and the way they dropped when the house was announced. Potter Harry, The hall did something interesting. It inhaled. The collective intake of breath was small, but Harry had spent 11 years among warriors who paid attention to rooms, and he felt the weight of every eye before he'd reached the stool. He sat. McGonagall placed the hat on his head. The voice was immediately present, interior and amused, and much older than it sounded. "Ah, now this is unusual." "Is it?" Harry said. "You've spoken to your own magic," the hat observed. "You've trained your body and your mind with people who take both seriously. There's courage here, certainly, but it's not the bright, impulsive kind. It's the deliberate sort, the kind that calculates before it commits." A pause. "There's ambition too, though you'd call it something else. Drive, will." "Can we skip to the decision?" Harry asked pleasantly. The hat made a sound that was perhaps laughter. "Gryffindor, I think. The deliberate courage is still courage. And there's something else, a loyalty that runs deeper than institution. That'll serve you there." Another pause. "Although Slytherin would have loved you." "I'm not very interested in what Slytherin would have loved," Harry said. "No," the hat agreed. "I can see that." "Very well then, Gryffindor." The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry removed the hat, handed it back to McGonagall, who received it with an expression that suggested she'd have liked very much to know what just happened in there, and walked to his table. He sat across from Ron and beside a girl named Parvati who smiled at him with the particular bright surprise of someone realizing the famous thing sitting across from them is unexpectedly an actual person. Ron leaned across. "What took so long?" "The hat and I had a brief negotiation," Harry said. Ron stared. "You can't negotiate with the Sorting Hat." "In my experience," Harry said, "you can negotiate with anything." The feast was extraordinary. Harry ate with the genuine wholehearted appetite of someone who had spent the day on trains and boats and staircases and had not had a real meal since breakfast, and the Hogwarts kitchens turned out to have no interest in doing anything by halves. He ate and talked and listened and built his picture of the room around him. The older students watching the first years with varying degrees of interest. The teachers at the high table, Dumbledore presiding over everything with the serene deliberateness of someone who was fully aware that the evening was significant. Dumbledore's eyes had found Harry during the feast, and Harry had met them directly, and something had passed between them, an acknowledgement, a mutual taking of measure. The old man had inclined his head slightly. Harry had done the same. Interesting man, he thought, very interested in appearing to know less than he knows. Percy Weasley, very official in his prefect badge, provided orientation information across the table. Neville fell into conversation with a quiet girl named Hannah who was working on a very precise diagram of the Great Hall's candle arrangement. Hermione had produced a notebook from somewhere and was annotating something. "All ready?" Ron said, watching her. "First impressions fade," she said without looking up. "You document them when they're fresh." "We haven't been here an hour," Ron said. "Which is why I'm writing now and not later," she said, in the tone of someone explaining something they considered self-evident. Harry watched this exchange and felt something loosen in his chest that he hadn't entirely realized was tight. Something about this felt not like Themyscira. Themyscira was his home and always would be, but like something that might become its own thing. A new kind of place. A new kind of belonging. He looked up at the ceiling where the clouds had shifted and one star was visible through a gap, bright and steady and entirely unbothered by the enchantment around it. He thought of Diana. She would be in London still, probably, or perhaps already moving back through the world toward the places that needed her. She would be thinking about him, not worrying. She didn't worry in the conventional sense, but thinking, the focused attending that was her form of care. He'd write tomorrow. A long one, he'd promised. The dormitory smelled of stone and old wood, and the slight mustiness of somewhere that had been closed for summer, and was now opening back up. 5 four-poster beds, red curtains, a window that looked out over the grounds where rain was still falling on black grass. Harry sat on his bed and looked at his space for the year, this bed in this tower in this castle, and thought about what it meant that objects could establish a temporary home. His trunk was at the foot of the bed. Nyx was on her perch by the window, apparently having fully assessed the dormitory and found it acceptable. Ron was across the room, already pulling his curtain half shut and having a brief conflict with a pillow. A boy named Dean Thomas was carefully pinning something to his wall. A boy named Seamus Finnegan had already somehow managed to slightly singe his pillowcase, which was either an accident or a tradition. Harry changed, lay back, and was asleep in approximately 90 seconds. The first week of classes rearranged Harry's understanding of what school could be. He'd studied on the Themyscira formally with scholars with structure and rigor, but the subjects had been history, language, strategy, philosophy. The magical curriculum was new in its specifics, though the discipline required was familiar. He'd had 11 years of learning difficult things. Sitting down and doing it again didn't frighten him. Charms with Professor Flitwick was precise and technical and satisfying in the way that close-quarter technique work was satisfying, small movements producing large results if you understood the underlying principles. Transfiguration with Professor McGonagall was, if anything, more demanding, and Harry respected that immediately. She didn't begin with the easy things. She began with the standard and expected you to meet it. He turned his match into a needle on the third try, which produced a look from McGonagall that acknowledged him without making a performance of it. He preferred this to praise from people who didn't mean it was noise. From McGonagall, it would mean something. Potions was Snape. Professor Snape entered the dungeons the way weather enters a room. You became aware of him before you saw him, something shifting in the air, the temperature of the space adjusting. He was black-robed, black-haired, with dark eyes that moved across the first years like hands searching a dark room. They found Harry and stopped. "Mr. Potter," Snape said. His voice was quiet and even and had the quality of something you felt in the sternum. "Our new celebrity." Harry looked at him steadily. "Tell me, Mr. Potter, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormhood?" "Draught of living death," Harry said. "One of the most powerful sleeping potions in existence. Asphodel belongs to the lily family, which seems relevant given who you're asking." A complete silence gripped the dungeon. Snape's eyes, which had narrowed at the first part of the answer, did something complicated at the second part. "Where the bezoar is found, stomach of a goat, serves as a general antidote to most poisons. If you're ever poisoned, eat the goat's stomach or be near one, given that it's effective in more concentrated contact doses. I tested this." "You tested?" "On Themyscira, the Amazon warriors occasionally work with plant toxins in training. I was 12 and had been reading about bezoars. I borrowed a goat." He paused. "The goat was fine." Hermione's hand had been up since the second question, and she was now staring at Harry with an expression that was caught exactly between impressed and outraged at having been beaten to it. Snape looked at Harry for a very long moment. The dungeon was very quiet. Harry returned the look without heat or challenge, just presence, the steady, unblinking attention he'd learned from people who used their eyes as a first weapon. "The draught of living death requires," Snape said finally, softer now, "which first step?" "Clockwise stir after the valerian root. 7 times exactly. Counterintuitive given that it's generally Wittershins for soporific compounds, but the valerian is the exception." Harry paused. "I read ahead, clearly." Snape's voice gave nothing. He turned away. 5 points to Gryffindor, Mr. Potter. Don't make a habit of being correct in my classroom." "I'll try," Harry said with complete seriousness. Ron beside him was doing something very controlled with his face. After class, on the stairs back up from the dungeons, Hermione appeared at Harry's elbow. "You read ahead," she said. "So did you." "Not far enough, apparently." She said it without bitterness, just honest recalibration. "How far ahead?" "Through the 5th-year syllabus. I had 3 months and a lot of boat time." She looked at him. "The goat thing, was that true?" "Completely." "Which toxin?" "Wolfsbane adjacent compound, more irritant than lethal, but still, the point held." She walked in silence for a moment. "Then I want to study with you." "I'd like that," Harry said. "I should warn you, I argue." "I'd be disappointed if you didn't." She nodded, as if confirming a contract. They reached the top of the stairs where Ron was waiting with 2 chocolate frogs and the expression of someone who had witnessed something he was still processing. "You told Snape you tested bezoars on a goat," Ron said. "Yes. And he gave you points." 5. Ron looked at the ceiling. "My entire family has been going to this school for generations," he said, "and I don't think any of them have ever gotten 5 points from Snape in the first week." "I find directness tends to work," Harry said. "Yeah, but Ron seemed to be reorganizing something internally." Then he held out a chocolate frog. "Dumbledore again, want to trade for Hengist of Woodcroft?" Harry took the frog. "Done." Defense against the dark arts was Quirrell. The man had a stutter and a turban, and the vague, deflated quality of someone who had once been inflated and had slowly lost it. He moved carefully, Harry noticed. Not the carefulness of someone managing an injury, but the carefulness of someone managing something they were carrying, something internal and heavy. Harry paid attention to Quirrell in the way he paid attention to things that didn't add up. The class itself was underpowered. Quirrell's theoretical knowledge was sound. He'd clearly studied the subject properly once, but something had happened between the studying and the teaching. He stuttered through material he clearly knew, lost his thread, seemed startled by his own sentences. Several students had already privately decided this class was going to be difficult to get much from. Harry thought it was the most interesting class of the week, for reasons that had nothing to do with the curriculum. After the second session, walking back toward the castle with Ron and Hermione, he said, "Something's wrong with him." "He's terrible," Ron said, not unkindly. "Loads of stuttering and that turban smells." "It's not incompetence," Harry said. "He knows the material, he's scared." Hermione looked at him. "Of what?" "I don't know yet." He looked back at the corridor they'd come from. But there's something in that classroom that makes the back of my neck feel like it does before lightning, and it's not coming from the subject matter." They both looked at him. "That's extremely specific," Hermione said. "I know." He turned back to them. "Tell me about the third-floor corridor." "How do you know about?" "Dumbledore mentioned it specifically in the welcome speech. Don't go there. Specific prohibition usually means specific reason." Ron frowned. "You're not thinking of actually. I'm thinking of understanding what we're in the middle of," Harry said. "It's different from going somewhere stupid." He paused. "But I'm not going anywhere yet. I want to understand more first." Hermione was already mentally reorganizing something. He could tell by the way her eyes went slightly distant. "I might be able to research the property history of the corridor. The library should have." "Don't make it obvious," Harry said. "Library's fine, just regular reading, nothing that looks like investigation." She nodded precisely. "Then you've done this before. Intelligence gathering in unfamiliar terrain," he said. "Yes." "Where exactly?" Ron said slowly. "Did you grow up?" Harry smiled. "I'll tell you the whole story sometime. It takes a while." "I've got time," Ron said immediately. "So have I," said Hermione. The three of them walked up toward the castle entrance together, and the afternoon light came through the high windows in long amber bars. And somewhere above them Hogwarts settled around the new arrivals the way old places do, not warmly, not coldly, but with the patience of something that has seen many people come to it, and has learned to wait and see what each of them would do. The letter he sent Diana that night was 6 pages long. He told her about the hat, and Ron, and Hermione, and the feast, and the ceiling. He told her about Snape in the way that acknowledged the man's competence without editorializing too much. He told her about Quirrell. He told her about the feeling in the defense classroom, the electricity before lightning quality that he'd learned on Themyscira to trust absolutely. He told her the castle felt old in the right way. He told her Nyx had already established dominance over the owlery, which was expected. He told her the food was excellent, and Ron Weasley had the laugh of someone who had forgotten to be self-conscious about it, which was Harry's favorite kind. He told her he was being careful. Both kinds. He sealed it, tied it to Nyx, opened the window. Nyx looked at him with the amber-eyed gravity of an owl who has a sense of her own dignity. "Don't be dramatic about it," Harry told her. She flew into the dark with the clean, decisive wingbeat of something that knew exactly where it was going. He watched her go until the darkness took her. Then he closed the window and went back to his desk, where magical theory and 3 pages of his own notes waited for him. Below, through the thick stone walls, the castle hummed with 1,000 sleeping lives. He opened his book. He read until midnight. He slept without dreams. Tomorrow there would be more to learn, and he intended to learn all of it. Chapter 3. What the Castle Keeps. October arrived in Scotland the way it always did, without asking permission and with a great deal of wind. The grounds went amber and rust overnight, the lake's surface turning the color of old pewter, and the corridors of Hogwarts developed the particular chill that made the suits of armor rattle in ways that were sometimes the castle settling and sometimes something else entirely. Harry had been here 6 weeks, long enough to know the difference. He was on the Quidditch pitch at 6:30 in the morning, which was earlier than anyone with optional alternatives would choose to be outside in October. And he was there because Oliver Wood had discovered, somewhat to his own disorientation, that the new first year he'd recruited as seeker after the flying lesson incident could outfly most of his existing team on a borrowed school broom. The flying lesson had not been, strictly speaking, the start of anything dramatic. It had been a Tuesday. Madame Hooch had them all mount their brooms on the lawn, and Harry had settled onto his with the ease of someone who'd been on a broomstick intermittently since he was 8. Diana had acquired one for him on one of her visits to the Wizarding World, reasoning that if he had magical ability it made sense to develop it broadly, and waited while Madame Hooch moved down the line correcting grips and adjusting postures. Neville's broom had gone up when it shouldn't have. He'd gone up with it, panicked, drifted over the castle wall, and then the broom had bucked and Neville had dropped his remembrall, a small glass ball his grandmother had sent, and fallen, and Harry had been in the air before any conscious decision had been made, which was exactly how Diana had always told him real reflexes worked. He'd caught Neville 12 feet above the ground and set them both back down in a single clean arc that had produced a silence from the watching class that went on a beat longer than it should have. Madame Hooch had looked at him with the expression of someone doing rapid arithmetic in their head. Draco Malfoy, who had been in the process of taking the remembrall from where it had landed and who had not anticipated any of this, was standing very still with the ball in his hand and the expression of someone whose scene had been interrupted mid-performance. "I'll take that," Harry said, landing beside him. Draco's jaw tightened. "You broke the rules. You could be expelled." Madame Hooch was right there. Harry held out his hand. "The remembrall." Their eyes held for a moment. Harry was perfectly relaxed, not in the performed way, but the genuine way, which was somehow worse for people looking for a reaction to feed off. Draco put the ball in his hand. McGonagall had appeared from nowhere with the speed unique to teachers who have developed a supernatural sense for exactly the kind of incident they need to address, and Harry had spent a moment expecting the very direct conversation about rule-breaking he knew was coming. Instead, she'd taken him inside and introduced him to Oliver Wood. Now it was 6:30 in October, and he was doing diving drills in the rain, and it was, he had to admit, excellent. The Nimbus 2000 moved the way the school brooms didn't, like an extension of thought rather than an object being steered. He came out of the third practice dive at 60 miles an hour 30 feet above the pitch, and leveled off with a sharp adjustment that should have required both hands on the broom and only needed one, and Wood below him made the sound he made when something happened that exceeded his prepared vocabulary. Again, Wood called. Slower entry this time, I want to see the pull-out mechanics. The mechanics are the same at any entry speed, Harry called back. What you want to see is whether I can locate the snitch mid-dive. Can you? Harry wheeled the Nimbus back up to height without answering and threw himself back into the dive, this time pulling his eyes off the ground target and scanning the surrounding air. And there it was, 15 feet to the left at his 2 o'clock. A small wobble of gold nearly invisible in the gray morning light, the practice snitch doing what practice snitches did. He adjusted mid-dive one-handed and closed his fist around it at 40 miles an hour without significantly altering his trajectory. The recovery arc brought him back to the pitch level. He hovered, opened his hand, showed Wood. Wood sat down on the commentator's bench, just sat down. 7 o'clock tomorrow, Harry said, or can we make it 6:45? I want time to review those beater coordination drills before breakfast. 6:45, Wood said faintly. Harry landed, pocketed the snitch to return to the equipment box and headed toward the castle. He had charms at 8, and he'd promised Hermione he'd look over her notes on Wingardium Leviosa before class, which meant breakfast needed to happen in a specific window, which meant he needed to be in the Great Hall no later than Quirrell was standing at the edge of the pitch. Harry stopped. The professor was some distance away, half obscured by the low mist rolling off the lake. He was standing with his back to the pitch watching something Harry couldn't see or nothing, perhaps just the water. But his posture had that quality again, the one Harry had been cataloging for 6 weeks. The careful stillness of a man managing an internal weight. The way he stood slightly tilted, one shoulder marginally higher as if compensating for something. Harry watched him for a moment. Quirrell didn't turn, didn't seem to know he was being observed. Then the back of Harry's neck did the thing. The lightning before the strike sensation he'd felt in the defense classroom, low frequency, barely there, like sound on the edge of hearing. He walked to breakfast. Explain to me, Hermione said, spreading her notes across the library table with the practiced efficiency of someone who had a system. Why Flitwick says the wand motion determines the levitation axis, but the textbook says it's the verbal emphasis that controls. Both are true, Harry said, pulling his own notes alongside hers. The wand motion initializes the direction of force. The verbal emphasis modulates intensity and sustain. They're working in sequence, not in competition. Flitwick simplified it for first-year framing, and the textbook simplified it in a different direction. She looked at her notes. So neither explanation is complete. Most explanations aren't. That's why you read both and synthesize. He scanned her annotations. He'd discovered an almost architectural approach to note-taking, color-coded, precisely margined with cross-reference indicators she'd apparently developed herself. It was deeply impressive and also slightly alarming. Your diagram here, he pointed, you've got the force vector going through the object's center of mass. What happens with irregular shapes? You adjust she paused. You apply the motion to the heaviest point and use emphasis to stabilize the rest. Have you tried it? We don't have practical until Thursday. I tried it last night with my textbooks. He turned his notes so she could see, worked on both. The transfiguration one's irregular enough to be a decent test case. Hermione looked at his practice notes the way she looked at everything she found interesting intensely, with the slight frown of someone who is simultaneously absorbing and evaluating. You practice in the dormitory. After hours, Ron thinks I'm writing letters. Are you not? I write letters and practice. I multitask. She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh but was related to one. This happened more often now. She'd started in September with the slightly overserious affect of someone who had learned that enthusiasm was sometimes a vulnerability, and had gradually, in the specific company of Harry and Ron, started letting the actual personality out from behind it. She laughed when things were funny. She argued when she disagreed. She was wrong occasionally and handled it with the brisk honesty of someone who had decided ego was inefficient. Harry had decided she was probably the most genuinely useful person he'd met at Hogwarts, which was not a small category given that the people at Hogwarts included McGonagall and Dumbledore. I need to talk to you about something, he said. She looked up. The third-floor corridor. She closed her notebook. This was a signal he'd learned. Hermione Granger closing a notebook meant she was moving from study mode to thinking mode, which was a different and in some ways more formidable operation. I've been looking into it. And the corridor itself is unremarkable. It's been standard restricted access for the last 30 years, maintenance corridor primarily. But I found something in the property annexes. She dropped her voice, a reflex rather than a necessity. The library was nearly empty at this hour. There's a reference to something being moved to Hogwarts for safekeeping. This summer from Gringotts. Harry went still. From Gringotts. Vault 713 specifically, it was emptied. He was quiet for a moment. Hagrid took me to Gringotts in August. He collected something from Vault 713 before he collected me, a small package. Her eyes widened, not dramatically. Hermione's expressions were usually contained, but they widened. You think it's in the third-floor corridor? I think it's the reason for the third-floor corridor. He kept his voice level. And I think whatever's been growing wrong in the defense classroom is connected to it. Harry, she put her elbows on the table and looked at him directly with the expression she used when she was about to say something she'd thought through. If Dumbledore's hidden something here, if it's genuinely dangerous, going looking for it is exactly what someone who wanted to steal it would do. I'm not going to steal it. I know that, but I don't know what it is and neither do you, and running toward unknown powerful objects seems… I'm not running toward anything. I'm understanding the landscape. He paused. There's a difference between intelligence and action. She studied him. You're going to end up going there anyway, aren't you? Only if I have to. What would constitute having to? If whatever I'm sensing in Quirrell's class gets closer to that thing. He held her gaze. I've been around enough dangerous things to know when something's moving. This is moving. She was quiet. Outside the library windows, wind was pressing rain against the glass in steady sheets. Tell me, she said finally. Tell you what? About where you grew up. You said you'd tell us sometime. She looked at him with the specific patience of someone who knows the right moment has arrived and is willing to wait for the subject to agree. Ron's not here. I won't interrupt. He'd been dancing around it for 6 weeks. Not deliberately, it wasn't something he was ashamed of, far from it, but explaining Themyscira required a particular kind of trust, the kind that took time to build. Hermione had spent 6 weeks building it without appearing to try, which he thought was the best way. Themyscira, he said. She frowned. The island from the old myths, except it's not old, it's very much current. He watched her processing this. Diana of Themyscira found me the night my parents died. She took me back with her. I grew up there. A pause. You know who Diana of Themyscira is? Hermione's expression had moved through several stages and arrived somewhere between stunned and deeply focused. I know the name from classical scholarship. She's referenced in post-war intelligence records as a verified historical figure. She stopped. She raised you. She's my guardian, my mother, in every way that matters. He held the steadiness of saying it easily, which was genuine. He'd never had trouble saying it. That's where I learned to fight, where I grew up around magic that was different from this, older, more elemental. He glanced at his hands. What I do with magic that isn't quite wand work, the things you've noticed me doing. The chair that moved when Peeves knocked it at you and you hadn't touched your wand, she said immediately. Yes, that. The Amazons helped me develop it before I had formal training. It's more instinctive than technical. She sat with this for a long moment. He let her sit with it. Philippus, she said suddenly. He blinked. Yes, captain of the Royal Guard, mentioned in the Peloponnesian commentaries. Is she? She trained me from age 7. She still writes to me. He smiled slightly. Her letters are extremely direct. So you were trained by, Hermione said, with the deliberate itemizing precision she used when cataloging new information. Wonder Woman and the Amazonian Royal Guard, which is why you can disarm a 7th year in dueling practice without using a counterjinx, and why you knew exactly what Snape was asking on the first day, and why you are constitutionally incapable of being intimidated by anything or anyone in this school. Constitutionally incapable is strong, Harry said. I'm perfectly capable of being intimidated. I just usually decide not to be. She looked at him. He could see her revising things, slotting this new information into the picture of him she'd been building since September. Then she reopened her notebook. Right, she said. Tell me more about what you're sensing from Quirrell. The Quidditch match against Slytherin was on a Saturday in mid-November when the sky had decided to provide weather for a very different sport entirely. Rain horizontal enough to sting, wind that turned broomsticks into interpretation exercises, and a crowd in the stands producing noise that was warm despite the cold simply by virtue of volume. Harry had been in the air since the whistle and had spent the first 20 minutes of the match doing 2 things simultaneously, tracking the snitch and tracking the Slytherin seeker, Terrence Higgs, who was better than his reputation and who was using the wind intelligently. The Quidditch pitch was a problem to be solved, not a place to be managed. He always thought about it this way. Philippus had taught him to read terrain in any condition, and a Quidditch pitch in a gale was terrain. He found the snitch at the 32-minute mark. It was sitting still, which snitches sometimes did in heavy rain. The gyroscopic mechanism that kept them moving was sensitive to extreme weather, hovering at approximately 200 feet just below the cloud base, visible as a faint gleam against the gray. Higgs hadn't seen it. Harry held his position. The match below him was tight, Gryffindor up by 20 points, but the Slytherin chasers were good and the score was moving, and he calculated quickly. If he moved for the snitch now, Higgs would follow immediately. The question was whether the Gryffindor lead was sufficient for the race to the snitch, or whether he needed another 20 points banked first. The Gryffindor chasers scored again while he was calculating. 30 points, that was enough. He moved. The dive was clean and committed and very fast. He bent low over the Nimbus 2000 and felt the rain pressing against his face like cold hands and the wind trying to push him off his line, and he made the adjustments in his shoulders and hips the way you adjust in a fight, constant and micro and automatic. Higgs was coming from the left, later off the mark, and Harry was going to reach it first by at least 3 seconds. He did. He hit the snitch at 110 feet, closed his fist around it, and pulled up hard enough that his vision grayed at the edges, and his broom protested the arc with a sound that was somewhere between a groan and a complaint. He came out of the recovery spinning slightly, bleeding off the extra momentum, and leveled out at 60 feet with the snitch held up in his right hand. The crowd below was doing something to the air with its volume that he felt in his ribs. He was flying back down toward the pitch, one-handed, the snitch gold and buzzing in his fist, when his broom did something that had no business happening at 60 feet. It bucked. Not the windbuck of a gust caught wrong, not the mechanical complaint of a stressed broomstick. It bucked with a pointed, deliberate quality, like something was pulling on it from below. He gripped instinctively with both legs and dropped the snitch to grab the handle two-handed, and the broom bucked again, trying to throw him sideways, spinning toward a roll. He counteracted it by will and muscle, and the instinctive low center of gravity positioning Philippus had drilled into him on completely different terrain for completely different purposes. But the principle was the same. He fought the broom for control without panic. Panic wasted energy he'd been taught, and kept his eyes moving, reading the air around him for what was wrong. Below him, Hermione was already moving through the stands. He caught it in his peripheral vision. She was heading toward someone with her wand out, muttering something, her face set. The broom stopped fighting him. All at once, like a command had been rescinded. It went smooth and cooperative, and he completed the descent at a controlled speed and landed on the pitch to the specific noise of a crowd that had been briefly afraid and was now extremely loud with relief. Ron sprinted out from the stands and nearly bowled him over. "What happened? Your broom was..." "Someone interfered with it," Harry said. He was already scanning the staff section. "I'm fine, where's Hermione?" Hermione appeared from around the edge of the stands, walking quickly with the expression of someone who had done a necessary thing and was ready to explain it. Her robes were damp and there was a slight smell of singed fabric near her cuffs. "I broke Snape's concentration," she said when she reached them. "He was muttering a jinx. I could see his eyes on your broom and his lips moving, and I lit a small fire near his robes, as a distraction." Ron's mouth was open. "You set Snape on fire." "A small fire, controlled. The point was to break his focus, and it did." She looked at Harry. "It was definitely Snape. I watched for 2 minutes before I moved." Harry said nothing for a moment. The broom incident had been not frightening exactly, but deeply clarifying. Someone had tried to drop him 60 feet in a storm full of witnesses. "That's interesting," he said. "Interesting?" Ron said. "Harry, he tried to kill you. If he wanted me dead, he had better opportunities than a Quidditch match." Harry turned the snitch over in his fingers. He'd snatched it back from where it had fallen during the broom fight. This was a warning or a test. He looked at Hermione. "Good instincts, by the way, the fire." She looked briefly startled at the directness of it, then nodded. It seemed like the fastest intervention that didn't require revealing anything significant. "It was." He pocketed the snitch. "Come on, I want to get somewhere warm where we can talk properly." The warm somewhere turned out to be a small room behind the Transfiguration classroom that McGonagall apparently used for marking, and that was, by the evidence of the slightly too convenient unlocking click when Harry tried the handle, also monitored by the castle in the way that Hogwarts monitored things when it had decided something warranted watching over. Harry had come to believe Hogwarts was aware. Not consciously the way a person was aware, but in the way very old structures sometimes were, responsive, attentive, occasionally helpful. He'd first suspected it when the castle kept providing him with empty classrooms he needed at exactly the right moments, and had worked out slightly inconvenient routes for Peeves when the poltergeist was heading toward someone who didn't deserve him. They sat in McGonagall's marking chairs, and Harry laid out what he knew, in the order he knew it. Ron and Hermione listened without interruption. which was its own testament to how far they'd come from September. The package Hagrid collected from Gringotts, he said, was moved to Hogwarts because someone tried to rob the vault. The same day Hagrid and I were there, whoever tried to rob it either knew we were coming or is very unlucky. He paused. Given what we know about Snape's behavior since term started and what Hermione saw tonight and the way the defense classroom makes my neck do things, I think there are two possibilities. Snape is working against whatever Dumbledore has hidden here, or Snape is protecting it and someone else is the problem. Could be both, Hermione said. Snape could be protecting the object and still be willing to drop you off a broomstick. Why would he want to drop Harry off a broomstick? Ron said. He hated my father, Harry said. It was something he'd pieced together from various overheard comments and from the particular quality of Snape's attention on him, not the attention of someone who hated Harry, but of someone who saw a person he'd already decided about when they looked at him. Whatever happened between them, it clearly didn't resolve. So he might be protecting the object and also have personal reasons to want you, Hermione stopped. No, that still doesn't make sense. Dropping you mid-Quidditch match draws attention to exactly the thing he'd want hidden. Unless someone made him, Harry said quietly. Both of them looked at him. Not Dumbledore, he said. Someone who has leverage on Snape or who can act through Snape without his full cooperation. He picked up a quill from McGonagall's desk, turned it. I've been thinking about Quirrell, about what I feel in that classroom. Every defense lesson I sit in that room and there's something, a frequency, a feeling. It gets stronger when Quirrell turns his back. He paused. The turban, Ron frowned. What about the turban? He never takes it off. It smells of garlic, supposedly for protection against vampires, but that's not a real protective measure. Garlic doesn't work that way. And the back of the turban has a shape. A silence opened up in the room. Not a head shape, Hermione said, understanding arriving fast across her face. A wrong shape, Harry said, like something's there that shouldn't be. He held the quill still. There's someone sharing that body, I'm almost certain of it. You're saying there's someone inside Quirrell's head, Ron said flatly. Then, because of course there is, because why would our first year be normal? If Voldemort lost his body, Harry said, he used the name straightforwardly, without the particular flinch most of the wizarding world had. And he needed to survive. Taking a host makes sense. Especially a host who was once a capable wizard and who had direct access to whatever Dumbledore is protecting here. The Philosopher's Stone, Hermione said very quietly. I think that's what Hagrid collected. I've been cross-referencing. Nicholas Flamel's name appears in Dumbledore's chocolate frog card, and Flamel is the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone, and the timing of the vault robbery and the transfer to Hogwarts. The Philosopher's Stone makes immortality possible, Harry said. Yes, which is what Voldemort needs. Yes. And Quirrell with Voldemort inside him is already at Hogwarts, Ron said, having followed all of this with the methodical attention of someone who moved slightly slower through new ideas but arrived with considerably more solidity. So there's a Dark Lord in the defense classroom. I've been sitting across from him every Tuesday and Thursday, Harry said. He's been watching me every time. He considered this without drama. He can't touch me. He's tried twice in class. He's come near me with the pretense of checking work, and both times there was a physical recoil. Not his, the thing inside him, like a repulsion. Lily Potter's protection, Hermione said. Whatever's left of it. That's why the broom, he couldn't act directly, so he tried to create an accident. She looked at him with the expression of someone working out the full implication of a thing. Harry, if he gets the stone, he can create a new body and the protection won't matter anymore. I know, Harry stood. That's why I need to understand the protections they've put around it. He looked at both of them, not to get to it, to understand what we're dealing with. Ron raised his hand partially, like a habitual reflex from class. Can I just say, I want to help. I know I'm not the best at magic in this group, but I want to help, and I'm not going anywhere. Harry looked at him. There was nothing in Ron's face except exactly what he'd said, no performance, no angle, just the pure uncomplicated statement of someone who had decided he was with you and had very little interest in being talked out of it. I know, Harry said. I wasn't going to suggest you go anywhere. Ron nodded, satisfied. Right then. It was Neville who gave them the first concrete clue about the protections. Entirely by accident, during a study session in the Gryffindor common room at the end of November. He'd been practicing herbology notes at the table beside them, while Harry and Hermione argued quietly about counterjinx theory, and Ron beat Harry at chess for the fourth consecutive time with a focused concentration that suggested he was having a very specific kind of revenge on the weak. Neville had been muttering to himself about his grandmother's devil's snare incident, a story that began with his gran, a conservatory, and a potted plant that had gotten considerably out of hand. Devil's snare doesn't like light, Neville was saying to nobody, writing it down. Gran always says it's one of the most dangerous beginner mistakes, planting it where there's any chance of Neville, Harry said. Neville looked up, startled at being addressed mid-mutter. Sorry, Devil's Snare. If you were hiding something important and needed a living defense, Devil's Snare would be an excellent first layer. Neville blinked. Well, yes, it's fast and it responds to movement, and most people panic when they're grabbed by something, and panicking makes it worse. Professor Sprout's work, Hermione said immediately. Makes sense, Harry said. Makes sense for what? Neville asked. Harry and Hermione and Ron all looked at him simultaneously, in the specific way of people who have decided how much of a conversation to share, and are currently debating revising that decision. Neville looked back at them. He had, over the course of the term, developed the habit of looking at Harry directly in a way he hadn't when they'd first met. Not because of any one thing, but because Harry had this effect on people who had been told all their lives not to expect to be seen, which was that he saw them clearly and found them worth seeing, and people who had been told otherwise needed time to believe that and generally came around. I'm not going to say anything, Neville said. To anyone. Obviously, we know you won't, Harry said, and meant it. Neville looked at the table. Devil's Snare, he said carefully, panics most people. But if you stay completely calm and use a light charm, it releases immediately. He paused. It would probably stop being useful quite quickly if someone knew what they were doing. Yes, Harry said. Thanks, Neville. Neville went back to his notes. He was pink around the ears, but his mouth was doing the thing that meant something pleased him, and he hadn't decided how to hold it yet. December arrived, and with it the first frost and the end-of-term examinations, which Harry completed with the focused efficiency of someone who had studied the material, understood it, and practiced it, and therefore found the process of demonstrating it to be a reasonable exercise rather than a crisis. Hermione finished her exams in the same state. Ron finished his with the expression of someone who had survived something and was ready to eat something substantial. The night before the Christmas holidays, Harry sat in his empty dormitory. Most students were going home for the break. Ron had invited him to the burrow, a genuine invitation delivered with Ron's characteristic lack of guile. Mum says you can come, she'll be very well, she'll feed you constantly and ask about your health constantly and it'll be brilliant, and Harry had nearly said yes. He was staying instead. It wasn't loneliness. It was purpose. Something had been growing in his understanding of the castle's lower depths for 3 months, and the Christmas break would empty Hogwarts, and certain things became clearer in quiet buildings. He'd learned this on the Themyscira, that the island revealed itself differently when the crowds were gone and only the Watchers remained. He wrote to Diana. He told her everything, the stone quarrel, what he'd pieced together about who was riding inside that turban. He told her in the straightforward way he told her everything, without softening it and without performing calm he didn't feel. He felt calm, largely, but he wanted her to know why rather than just experiencing its surface. Her letter back came 2 days into the holiday by a bird he didn't recognize, something large and golden-feathered that made Nyx extremely thoughtful on her perch. The letter was in Diana's handwriting, strong and angular, and he sat on his bed in the empty dormitory and read it twice. You are not wrong about the frequency you feel, she wrote. I believe you entirely. When something evil is close, it does something to the air. You've been in enough training scenarios with me to have developed that sense accurately, and I trust it. Then, do not go looking for a confrontation before it comes looking for you. Intelligence before action, you know this. And then at the bottom in smaller writing that had a different quality to it, the quality of words written after putting down the pen and picking it back up. I am proud of you, not for what you may face, for who you are while you're waiting to face it. Your mother would be too, both of them. He sat with that for a long time. Then he folded the letter, put it with the others in the locked box in his trunk, pulled on his outer robe and went downstairs. The castle at Christmas was another kind of place. Tree-lit, candle-warm, quieter in a way that let the actual age of it come through, the depth in the stone, the patience in the staircases, the particular quality of a building that had been enduring winters for 1,000 years and was not worried about this one. Harry walked its corridors the way he'd walked the Themyscira's, not as a tourist but as a resident, learning the texture of it. He found the Mirror of Arist on Christmas night. At the end of a corridor, he'd explored following the trail of something that wasn't quite a sound. He stood in front of it and looked, and the mirror showed him what it showed him, and he looked for a long time at his parents' faces, his mother's eyes, which were his eyes, and at the tall woman beside them with dark hair and a warrior's bearing and an expression that said, there you are, and he stood there until it didn't hurt as sharply, and then he turned away. He did not go back. Dumbledore found him in the library the next day. This was, Harry suspected, not entirely a coincidence. The old man moved through Hogwarts with the slightly too deliberate wandering of someone who always knew exactly where he was going. Ah, Dumbledore said. Harry, he said his name the way people said the names of things they'd been thinking about. Lemon drop, no thank you. Dumbledore settled into the chair across the library table and looked at him with those blue eyes that were kind and sharp in precisely equal proportion. "You've been exploring the castle. It's the holidays, I have time." Dumbledore's gaze was the kind that could read rooms, and Harry had the distinct sense it was currently reading him. "I imagine you've been thinking a great deal about certain things." "Several things," Harry said pleasantly. "I imagine you are not the sort of student who simply accepts that certain corridors are off-limits." "I imagine," Harry said, "that you put the restriction there knowing what it would do to the sort of students who ask questions, which means either you expected someone to go looking or you expected the restriction to be sufficient deterrent and you've been surprised." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "I wonder," the old man said, "whether you would tell me what you've found." "I wonder," Harry said with equal pleasantness, "whether you already know." The pause that followed had quality to it, two people who were, in their different ways, very good at reading rooms, reading each other. Harry held it without discomfort. Dumbledore seemed to find the discomfort's absence interesting. "Your guardian raised you well," Dumbledore said finally. "She would be pleased to hear it." Harry closed his book. "Professor, I know what's in the third-floor corridor, and I know what's in Professor Quirrell's classroom that isn't Professor Quirrell, and I want you to understand that I don't intend to do anything stupid about either of those facts." He met the blue eyes steadily. "But I also want you to understand that when something comes to a head, because it will come to a head, and we both know it, I'm not going to be a bystander." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. The kind of moment that in other conversations might have been filled with gentle redirection or careful management, but wasn't here, because Harry had managed to put enough of himself in the sentence that there was no soft angle for management to find. "No," the old man said, "I expect you won't be." He stood slowly, and there was something in the gesture that wasn't performance, a genuine weight behind it, the weight of a man who had plans that were not going to unfold as planned and was beginning to accept this. "Be careful, Harry." "I'm always careful," Harry said. Dumbledore paused at the library door. "I mean be careful of rushing towards something simply because you are not afraid of it. Bravery and wisdom require each other." Harry thought of Diana. He thought of what she'd written at the bottom of her letter in the smaller writing. He thought of Ayla, ancient in the Themyscira library, pressing his hands in hers. He thought of Philippus, who had drilled into him from the beginning that the warrior who controls the engagement survives longer than the warrior who simply charges it. "I know," he said. "I was taught that." Dumbledore held his gaze for a moment longer, and something in those blue eyes shifted, just slightly, the adjustment a very good plan makes when the terrain proves different from the map. Then he nodded once and left. Harry sat alone in the library for a long time after, the castle quiet around him and the winter dark pressing at the windows, and thought about everything that was moving in the deep structure of this year, the way he'd been taught to think about battles, not as events but as progressions, each action the consequence of the one before, the shape of the ending already present in the beginning if you knew how to read it. Something was going to happen before this year was out. He could feel it the way he felt weather. He was ready. He went to bed, slept well, and in the morning began January. Chapter 4. The gauntlet below the trapdoor was exactly where Harry had calculated it would be. He stood at the third-floor corridor door in the last week of May with Hermione on his left and Ron on his right, and the castle was quiet around them in the way it got quiet after midnight, not absence of sound but a deeper, more attentive kind of silence, the silence of a very old place listening to itself breathe. The locked door had taken Hermione 40 seconds, and a spell she'd found in a sixth-year charms text she technically wasn't supposed to have accessed. The corridor beyond was dim and smelled of dog. A very large dog. "Fluffy," Ron said quietly. Harry had found the name 2 months ago. Hagrid had mentioned it once sideways in the context of a conversation about dangerous magical creatures that Harry had steered toward that subject with the careful indirection of someone who'd learned from Ayla how to read around a thing you weren't supposed to be looking at directly. Rubius Hagrid, he'd thought, is the kindest man in this castle and also constitutionally incapable of keeping a secret when someone asks him a question with genuine interest. He liked Hagrid enormously. This didn't stop him from being observant. "He's asleep," Hermione said. She was doing the thing she did under pressure, going very still and precise, all the nervous energy converted into focus. It was, Harry had come to think, one of her best qualities. Most people frittered energy in a crisis. Hermione compressed it. "The harp," Harry said. He could hear it from here, a small enchanted instrument on the floor near the dog's enormous paw, tinkling away the last bars of something meandering. "It's nearly done. We need to move before he wakes." Ron muttered, but he was already moving, which was the important thing about Ron. He could be apprehensive and still go. Harry had decided this was considerably more useful than someone who went without apprehension, because they hadn't understood the situation. The dog, 3 heads, each one the size of a small car, currently in various states of deep slumber, was draped across the trapdoor the way large animals drape themselves across things, with the complete unself-conscious entitlement of something that did not expect the world to require it to move. Harry crossed the floor with the deliberate, weight-controlled movement Philippus had drilled into him for navigating near sleeping threats, slow enough to be silent, purposeful enough to not hesitate, because hesitation created its own noise. He reached the trapdoor and got his fingers under the edge. The harp's last note faded. He pulled the trapdoor open in one smooth motion and dropped through before the nearest head could do more than shift and snuffle. He heard Hermione drop, then Ron, and then the trapdoor above swung shut and they were falling through darkness. Not far, something broke the fall, soft, cold, vine-like, immediately active, devil's snare. It moved fast. Not aggressively, exactly, more like water taking the shape of its container, filling the available space around whatever warm thing had entered its environment. Harry felt it wrap his arms and begin the slow constriction that would tighten in proportion to resistance, and he went completely still. "Don't struggle," he said. I know, Hermione was already reciting the countercharm clear and steady, and a pale blue-white light bloomed from her wand tip and the devil's snare recoiled from the 3 of them at once, curling back like smoke pulled through a window. They dropped the last few feet and landed on stone. "Neville sends his regards," Harry said, standing and dusting off. Ron made a noise that was somewhere between a laugh and a wheeze. "Can we maybe not joke until we're somewhere less likely to kill us? I find joking improves my performance in high-stress environments." Harry's wand was out and he was already reading the next space ahead, a low corridor, stone and cold, opening into something larger. He could feel the layers of enchantment ahead, not just 1 or 2, multiple distinct, each with a different magical signature. Multiple professors, multiple disciplines, designed to be cumulative to defeat someone who might overcome 1 or 2 but not all. Come on. The corridor opened into a chamber with something moving in it that was audible before it was visible. A high rattling rush. The sound of a great many small hard things in rapid motion. Then the torches came alive as they entered and the moving things became visible. Keys, hundreds of them winged, careening around the vaulted ceiling in a dense, chaotic swarm that caught the torchlight and threw it back in fragments. The door on the far side was locked and had 7 keyholes that Harry counted in one sweep of his eyes, and the keys above were all different shapes and ages, and the correct one was somewhere in that chaos. "Broomsticks," Ron said, having spotted them along the wall. "Brilliant. We fly up, we look for the oldest one. The door looks old, so the key probably." "The oldest key in the room is the silver one with the broken wing at the 10 o'clock position," Harry said. He was looking up at the swarm without moving his head, the way Philippus had taught him to scan without telegraphing where he was looking. "Second ring of the pattern, slightly lower. It's flying slightly off. The broken wing affects its trajectory, gives it a wobble about every 8 rotations." "A beat. How long did it take you to find it?" Hermione asked. "Since we came in," Harry said, which had been approximately 15 seconds. "It'll come around again in 4 seconds, 3, 2, he took the nearest broom, was in the air before the 1 count finished, and had the silver key in his hand before any of the other keys had processed that something was after one of them. The moment the key was caught, the swarm went wild, all of them rushing and wheeling in a sudden collective agitation, battering at anything they could reach. Harry was already at the far door, key in the first lock turning. The locks opened in sequence quickly, and the door swung inward and he landed on the threshold. Hermione and Ron were through in seconds, and he pulled the door shut behind them and the key noise cut off. "I've been playing chess my whole life," Ron said. When he saw the next chamber and something in his voice changed, went quieter, more concentrated, the way Harry's went when something fell into a category he'd been prepared for. "And this is the biggest board I've ever seen." The chess set was enormous and carved from stone that had the weight and presence of something that had been moved by magic for years, until it had absorbed the habit of being violent. The pieces stood 8 feet tall, the board black and white marble, the far door visible beyond the opposite side. The pieces were not decorative. They had the density of things that worked. "We need to play across," Hermione said. "I know," Ron said. He was already walking the edge of the board, reading the layout with his eyes the way he read chess boards everywhere, total and spatial, and processing several moves ahead simultaneously. Harry had watched Ron play chess enough in the common room to know that this was the place Ron Weasley's intelligence lived most naturally. Most people never found that place in someone else, or took it for granted when they did. Harry had never taken it for granted. "We take the places of 3 pieces," Ron said. "I'll be the knight, you 2 bishop and castle. Do what I tell you when I tell you exactly and don't ask why." He looked at Harry specifically. "Can you do that?" "Completely," Harry said. Ron nodded. He looked at the board again. He looked at the massive stone king on the far side. "Right," he said. "Let's play." What followed was 12 minutes of the most intense and quietly brilliant thing Harry had watched someone do. Ron moved them, and the other pieces with the calm authority of someone who had stepped into the version of the world where they were most themselves, calling positions and captures and sacrifices with the focused ease of someone conducting something they'd rehearsed in their bones. Twice Harry moved through spaces where pieces swung to block him and didn't because Ron had anticipated the block 3 moves earlier and opened a counter. The board moved around them like weather. 2 red bishops were taken in stone-shattering impacts. A knight charged across 3 squares and Ron watched it come with the complete stillness of someone who knew exactly how this calculation ended. Ron, Hermione started. Go, Ron said, both of you. When I make this move, the king will be in check and you'll have a clear path. You need to be running. You'll get hit, Harry said, probably. I'll be fine. He looked at Harry with the uncomplicated certainty of someone who had made a decision they were at peace with. Go and finish this. I'll be right here when you're done. He paused. Don't lose. Harry held his gaze for a moment. There was nothing performative in what Ron had said, no dramatics, no look how brave I am, just a person doing the thing they were best at and trusting the people they'd chosen to do theirs. I'll be quick, Harry said. I know. Ron made his move. The board erupted. Harry and Hermione were running across the board through the far door, and behind them there was the terrible concussive sound of a stone knight taking an impact that would have killed anything that didn't go numb first. And Harry didn't stop running because stopping would have made it mean nothing. The next chamber smelled before they reached it. It was the smell of something large and wrong, reptilian, old, the smell of venom and muscle, and something that hadn't evolved to share space with anything that didn't run from it. The troll was down and already unconscious when they entered, which was a piece of luck Harry recognized as Dumbledore's doing or possibly someone else's. There were layers to what had been arranged here that he was still reading. Someone got here first, Hermione said, looking at the troll. Quirrell, Harry said, he's ahead of us. He kept moving. How can you be sure? The smell in this room has 2 layers. Troll is the obvious one. He was already through the far door. The second one is the garlic he uses in the turban. He came through this way not long ago. She followed him into the next chamber and stopped. The room was full of fire. Not dangerous fire, contained fire, 2 walls of it flanking a central table on which sat 7 bottles of different shapes and sizes. The flames were purple at one end and black at the other, and between the 2 doors there was no way through without the bottles. Hermione picked up the parchment from the table immediately and read it while Harry read the bottles. Logic puzzle, Hermione said, scanning the verse. The answers in the arrangement, the sizes, the positions, 2 are safe, Harry said. He was reading the bottles with his eyes and with the back of the neck sense that had developed into something more refined over the term. 1 takes you forward, 1 takes you back. The rest are poison or nettle wine. He pointed. That one, the smallest one far right, that's the one that goes forward. How? She looked at the parchment again, working through it. 40 seconds. Yes, you're right. Logically, yes. She looked up. How did you get there before working through the... I read the negative space, Harry said. The wine smells faintly sweet. The poison is slightly colder. The nettle wine has a specific blue tinge at the base and most of these don't. That narrows it significantly. Then the verse gives you the rest. She stared at him. It was the expression she had when something impressed her against her will, which he'd come to find one of her best ones. There's only enough forward potion for 1 person, she said. Yes. She looked at the bottle. She looked at the purple fire behind them the way they'd come. She looked at him with the expression of someone who had been calculating from the moment they entered the room. Harry, I need to go back. For Ron, I know, he said. Take the back potion. You can navigate everything we've come through. Get Ron, have him send Nyx. She's in the owlery. Tell her my name and urgent and she'll know. He picked up the smallest bottle. And Hermione, don't tell me to be careful, she said. I wasn't going to, he held her gaze. I was going to say thank you. For September and October and every argument about every theory you made this year sharper. She looked at him for precisely 1 second with an expression that had several things in it, then don't be dramatic about it. She took the back potion. Go, he drank the forward potion. It was cold, a specific cold that moved through him like standing water, and then he walked into the black fire and came out the other side. The last chamber was dim and held a mirror. The mirror of Arist. He recognized it immediately, the ornate frame, the inscription along the top, the way the glass held a quality of depth that regular mirrors didn't have. It had been moved. Someone had moved it from the corridor where he'd found it at Christmas and installed it here as a final defense, the last thing between whatever was in Quirrell and the stone. Quirrell was standing in front of it. He turned when Harry entered and the composure on his face was wrong, too smooth, the stutter gone, the deflated quality that had defined him all year suddenly absent. What was underneath it was not Quirrell. Not entirely. There was something else in the arrangement of those features, something wearing a face the way you wear borrowed clothes. Harry Potter, Quirrell said. His voice was different, cleaner. The stutter had been performance then all along. I wondered when you'd arrive. I'd hoped Dumbledore's little obstacles would slow you considerably more. They were well designed, Harry said, moving into the room, keeping distance, reading the space. One way in, one way out, the mirror between them. Professor Snape's flames were the hardest piece. Severus, Quirrell's mouth curved. Always so theatrical. He's been trying to protect the stone, you know, trying to watch me, anticipate me. He suspected from the beginning. He paused. He never suspected the right things. What did he miss? That it was never about getting past the obstacles. Quirrell moved to the mirror, looked into it with the frustrated concentration of someone who had been looking at something for a long time without finding what they wanted. It's about the mirror. Dumbledore is cleverer than most people give him credit for. I could burn through every protection in this building and still not take the stone from this glass. Harry looked at the mirror. Looked at his own reflection, and there he was looking back at himself, and in his reflection's hand was a small red stone that the real Harry did not have. The stone. The mirror showed you your deepest desire. Dumbledore had put it here because only someone who wanted to find it rather than use it could take it from the glass. He understood in a clean, complete way what that meant. Quirrell turned from the mirror. His eyes had changed, not physically, but in some fundamental quality of occupancy. Something else was looking out of them now, and it was looking at Harry with an attention that had the weight of decades in it. "What do you see?" Quirrell asked, and the voice was not Quirrell's anymore in any way. Harry looked at the mirror. His reflection held the stone. "I see myself with it," he said, completely honest. "Then take it from the glass," said the voice that was not Quirrell. He didn't move. "I know what you are," Harry said, not to Quirrell, to the thing behind Quirrell's eyes. "I've known for months." "Have you?" There was something in the voice that was not anger, more like a very old curiosity encountering something it hadn't expected to encounter. "The famous Harry Potter. I have wondered about you all year, sitting in my classroom looking at me with those extraordinary eyes, so like your mother's." "She was extraordinary," Harry said. "I've been told." "She was." And something moved through Quirrell's expression that was too complex and too dark to read cleanly. "She also chose wrongly. She stood between you and me, and everything since has been consequence." A pause. "She made you into a problem." "I prefer to think of myself as an outcome," Harry said. He was still reading the room, still calculating, and he had arrived at the conclusion that needed to be reached. The mirror was behind Quirrell, and the stone was in the mirror, and the way to get the stone was not to fight Quirrell but to reach the mirror. The only way to reach the mirror was to move Quirrell. And the only thing he'd had all year that could move Quirrell was proximity. The magical repulsion he'd felt in defense class, every time Quirrell had come near him, that wasn't a coincidence and it wasn't indefinite. It was the specific targeted resonance of his mother's sacrifice working against whoever had killed her. It had repelled at a distance, had made the broomstick jinx indirect, had made a year of attempted interference glancing rather than direct. But he'd never tested it at full contact. He walked toward Quirrell. "What are you?" Quirrell stepped back instinctively, the body reacting before the thing inside it could decide differently. "Don't come near me." "Why not?" Harry said and kept walking. The repulsion hit at about 6 feet, a physical pressure, a pushback in the air between them, the way two like magnetic poles felt before they separated. Harry walked into it and through it and got his hand around Quirrell's wrist. The effect was immediate and extraordinary. Quirrell screamed, and beneath the scream was another sound, lower and more wrong, the sound of something that was not a voice encountering pain it had forgotten it could feel. The skin under Harry's hand blistered and cracked, not with heat but with something that worked like heat, the opposite of whatever Voldemort's touch had been, his mother's love converted by years and will and sacrifice into something that could unmake what had tried to unmake her son. Harry had a half-second of clarity during which he did the one thing that mattered. He lunged past Quirrell's flailing arm, got his palm flat against the mirror's glass, and thought of the stone. Not of using it. Not of what it could give him. He thought of picking it up and putting it somewhere safe, the same way he'd have thought of picking up a weapon in a sparring match to keep it away from someone who was going to misuse it. The mirror gave him the stone. He felt it drop into his hand from the glass, solid and warm, the size of a walnut, and he closed his fingers around it and turned back. Quirrell was between him and the door. The professor, or what was inhabiting the professor, was hunched forward, both hands raised, and Harry watched the turban begin to unravel. Not Quirrell's doing. The thing behind him in him was taking control entirely now, the pretense of the host set aside in the specific way dangerous things set pretenses aside when they've decided they have nothing to lose. The turban fell. What was on the back of Quirrell's head was Voldemort. Not physically, not in any way that was corporeal or solid, but present. A face growing from the back of a skull, chalk-white, red-eyed, burning with the specific intensity of something that had been denied its physical form for 10 years and had not grown more patient about it. Harry looked at it. The face looked at him. The red eyes moved to his hand. "Give it to me," it said. The voice had weight and will behind it, the kind of voice that had years of practice making people comply through sound alone. It was, if Harry was being honest, an impressive voice. He thought Diana's battle cry was more frightening, but he had context for that. "No," Harry said, "you don't understand what I am. I understand exactly what you are." He kept the stone in his closed fist and his eyes on the face. "You're a man who was so afraid of death that you broke yourself trying to escape it and ended up becoming the thing you feared most, something half alive, incomplete, dependent on other people's bodies to exist." He paused. "That's not power. That's a very long, very elaborate failure." Something moved in those red eyes that was too old and too dark to name simply. Not anger exactly, something that had eaten anger decades ago and was running on the residue. "Your mother said something similar," it said softly, "before I killed her." The thing that moved through Harry at that was cold and clean and focused. Not grief, he'd done his grief in private over the course of a year of understanding more clearly what had been taken from him. This was something sharper, the specific quality of resolve that doesn't need heat because it has already decided. "Then she was right," Harry said. "She usually was." He walked forward. Quirrell lunged at him, not a spell, not a considered attack. The body's animal desperation overriding whatever control the thing in his head had, and Harry stepped inside the reach the way Philippus had taught him to step inside aggressive lunges, using the attacker's momentum rather than opposing it, and got both hands on Quirrell's face. It was different from the wrist. The face was where the second consciousness lived, where it had built its temporary residence inside another person's body, and the contact between his hands and that face produced something that started as heat and became light, and Harry kept his grip while Quirrell's screaming reached a pitch that seemed to affect the room itself, the mirror behind them trembling, the torch flames guttering. He held on. Philippus had taught him to hold on. You hold on when the other person is pulling to get free, because the moment you release is the moment you lose the advantage. You breathe, you stay grounded, you let the training do what it was trained to do. He breathed, he stayed grounded. The light got brighter, and then Quirrell's legs buckled and the screaming became something that didn't have language in it, and Harry felt the consciousness that had been riding this man for a year tear loose, not physically but in the way that mattered more, in the dimension where the magic happened, and the room went briefly completely white, and then very dark, and then nothing. He became aware of things in pieces, the way you do when consciousness is coming back from somewhere it shouldn't have gone. Floor, stone. Cold, his hand was still closed around something small and hard. The stone. He opened his eyes. The chamber was empty except for him. Quirrell was there, crumpled small, looking genuinely like a person now, which was somehow more distressing than he'd looked when he was inhabited. Whatever had been inside him was gone. Harry could feel the absence of it the way you feel the absence of a sound that's been present so long you stopped registering it. He sat up. His hands had blisters on them that he hadn't felt happening. His scar hurt. A dull, fading pain, like an echo of something that had peaked and was now going. He looked at Quirrell. The man was breathing. "I'm sorry," Harry said, to the breathing and the emptiness of the room. "He chose you because of what you knew. You deserved better than what you chose, and considerably better than what was done to you after." He didn't know if Quirrell could hear him. He said it anyway. It seemed right to say. He stood. His legs worked. Everything worked. Actually, he'd expected worse given the whiteout light and the loss of consciousness. He touched his face, his hands, his ribs, functional. He looked at the stone in his palm, small, ordinary-looking, an almost laughable object to have so much weight attached to it. He closed his fingers around it again. The door was open. He walked toward it. The chambers going back were different now without the pressure of forward motion. He could feel the protections in each room resettling, the enchantments closing back behind him, the mirror chamber's magic rearranging itself as he left it. The giant chess set beyond was still. The pieces had reset or were in the process of resetting. Ron was where he'd been. Of course he was. He was sitting against the wall where the stone knight had left him. Conscious, barely, but conscious. With his hand pressed against his side and the expression of someone doing the pain management approach of concentrating very hard on a point about 3 feet in front of them. Harry was beside him before he'd finished processing the sight of him. "Before you ask," Ron said with the specific dignity of someone who is not going to admit how much anything hurts, "I'm fine." "You're not fine," Harry said. He was already looking ribs probably from the angle of the impact and the way Ron was holding his side. "But you're okay, there's a difference." "How'd it go?" "Well enough." Harry held up his closed fist with the stone. Ron stared at it. "You got it, you actually got it." He leaned his head back against the wall. "Of course you did." He said it with the zero-surprise tone of someone who had revised all his expectations at some point in September and had not looked back. "Hermione, she went back through, she'll have sent for help." "Good." Ron was quiet for a moment, then with genuine curiosity beneath the pain, "What was it like, the last room?" Harry thought about how to answer that. He thought about the mirror and the stone in his hand and Quirrell's face and the red eyes and the white light and the feeling of something tearing loose from somewhere it had embedded itself for a year. Clear, he said. It was very clear. Ron nodded slowly. That seemed to satisfy him in some specific way. Yeah, he said, I figured it would be. He shifted, winced, resettled. I should have asked before all of this, what was the last room? One defense, one decision, and you made the right one. I think so. Then it's fine, Ron said with complete certainty. It's all fine. Harry sat against the wall beside him. Above them, through all the stone and earth and enchantment, the castle was still, midnight quiet, year-end peaceful, holding all its people sleeping in towers while two 11-year-olds sat on a dungeon floor and waited for the world to come find them. The stone was warm in Harry's palm. He kept it there and kept it closed, and didn't let go until the sound of footsteps above them announced that the world had arrived. Chapter 5. Face without a face, the hospital wing smelled of dittany and something sweeter underneath it, some base note remedy that had been applied to these walls over so many years it had become part of the stone itself. Harry had been awake since dawn, which was earlier than Madame Pomfrey preferred her patients to be awake, because awake patients had opinions about their treatment, and Madame Pomfrey had strong feelings about opinions during recovery. He'd been here 3 days. The first day he didn't remember clearly, fragments mostly, the way consciousness assembles itself after a significant event. Dumbledore's face looking down at him in the dungeon corridor, carefully neutral in the way very controlled people are when they are not neutral at all. The movement of a stretcher. Madame Pomfrey's hands, quick and certain, and her voice saying things to someone behind her with the clipped efficiency of someone who had done difficult things many times and had made peace with the doing. Ron's voice from somewhere nearby, the familiar cadence of it enough to let Harry's nervous system decide that the immediate crisis had resolved. The second day he'd been conscious for most of it and had spent it sleeping anyway, which was his body's sensible response to a situation his mind was still catching up to. Hermione had sat in the chair beside his bed for 4 hours reading and not speaking, which was, he had come to understand, her highest expression of care, the willingness to be present without making the presence into a performance. The third day, which was today, he felt like himself. The blisters on his hands had been treated to the point of invisibility. His scar had ached for about 36 hours and then stopped. His head was clear. Outside the narrow windows of the hospital wing, June had arrived while he wasn't watching, and the grounds were that particular Scottish green that only happened in early summer, aggressive and saturated, like the hillside was making an argument. He was reviewing everything that had happened with the systematic attention he brought to any completed operation when the door opened. Ron came in first, moving with the careful deliberateness of someone whose ribs had been healed, but who had been told sternly not to test the healing. Hermione came in behind him with a stack of library books, which Harry suspected was not sanctioned by Madame Pomfrey's reading is fine but nothing stimulating rule. She set them on the bedside table with a look that dared him to comment. He didn't comment, he was delighted to see them. You look significantly more alive, Ron said, settling into the chair with the ginger confidence of the newly mended. I feel it. Harry looked at them both. How much do you know? Dumbledore talked to us, Hermione said. She sat on the edge of the other chair and folded her hands in her lap, which was her body's version of taking a breath before something significant. The stone is gone, destroyed, he said. Nicholas Flamel agreed to it. She paused. Quirrell is dead. Harry had known this. He'd felt it in the dungeon, in the moment the white light resolved and the room went quiet. He'd known what the stillness of that chamber meant. Knowing it and hearing it confirmed were different things, but not catastrophically different. He'd had 3 days to hold the knowledge, to let it settle into the right place. He chose to let something in, Harry said. I know that. I also know something used him up and discarded what was left, and the choice he made at the beginning doesn't make the end his fault in any simple way. He was quiet for a moment. He was a good teacher once, I think, before. There's a whole file on him in the restricted section, Hermione said quietly. I looked. Yes, he was good before. He went looking for Voldemort after he went missing and something found him first. That's almost always how it works, Harry said. The thing you go looking for isn't the thing you find. A silence settled in the room that was comfortable rather than empty. What actually happened down there? Ron asked. Not pushy, curious, in the genuine way he was curious about things that mattered to him. You were fine when I last saw you, and then Hermione went for help, and then Dumbledore came back up with you and you were not awake. How not awake? Harry said. Very not awake, Ron said. Harry told them. All of it, the mirror, the stone, Quirrell's unraveling, the contact and what it produced, the light. He told it straightforwardly without dramatizing it because they'd been in it with him and they deserved the whole thing. He watched their faces as he talked. Hermione's was doing the thing it did when she was processing something she already understood most of but was finding the remaining pieces for. Ron's was doing the thing it did when he was absorbing something he couldn't quite believe even while believing it completely. "You burned him," Ron said when Harry reached the part about the contact. "Just by touching him." "My mother burned him," Harry said. "I was just the delivery mechanism." "That's," Ron said and stopped and started again. "That's a significant delivery mechanism. Lily Potter was a significant woman." Harry glanced at his hands, healed smooth, no remaining evidence of what had happened in that room. "I've known that my whole life. This was just proof." "What did it feel like?" Hermione asked. She asked it carefully, the way she asked things she knew might have edges. He thought about it. He'd been thinking about it for 3 days, in between the sleeping and the recovery, turning the memory over the way you turn an object to see it from all angles. "Like being a conduit," he said finally. "Like something was passing through me rather than coming from me. I was the point of contact, but the force was hers." He paused. "And his underneath it. The thing in Quirrell reacted to my presence all year, always pulling back, always finding indirect routes. In the end it couldn't do that anymore, and when it had to meet it directly, he shook his head. It couldn't survive that. Whatever she put into that sacrifice was built specifically to undo what he was." Hermione was very still. "You're saying her death was a direct counter to his magic. More than that, a direct counter to what he became. To the thing that had stripped everything human out of him and kept only the will to survive." He looked at the ceiling. "You can't survive contact with the fullest expression of something you've entirely abandoned." She looked at him for a moment. "You've thought about this a lot." "I've had 3 days in a hospital bed." "Fair." Ron had been quiet during this exchange with the listening quality he got when a conversation had moved into territory he was tracking rather than leading, which he did without ego and without checking out. "So what happens now?" he asked. "Voldemort's just gone." "Not gone," Harry said immediately. "Diminished, set back. He was barely existent before he had Quirrell, and now he's less than that." He sat up straighter, setting aside the pillow arrangement Madame Pomfrey had constructed with the efficiency of someone who had decided the pillow arrangement was now optional. "He'll find another way. He always does. That's what he is. The will to exist past every reasonable endpoint." He looked at Ron. "This isn't over. I want you to know that I know that." "Yeah," Ron said. He didn't say it like bad news. He said it like someone who had been with Harry through a dungeon and a chess set and a hospital room and had revised their assessment of what they could manage. "We figured." "We did," Hermione confirmed. Harry looked at them both, Ron with his healed ribs and his unshakable quality of being exactly who he was in every situation, Hermione with her library books and her careful hands and the specific fierceness she kept controlled the way other people kept tempers controlled. 2 people who had walked into a dungeon with him without being asked. "Thank you," he said. He meant it with everything he had, which was, in Harry's case, considerable. Neither of them made it weird. That was the best thing about them. "Obviously," Ron said. "Obviously," Hermione agreed. Dumbledore came that afternoon while Madame Pomfrey was in her office and the ward was quiet. He moved with the particular unhurried quality he had, the deliberateness of someone who had learned to treat time differently from most people, either because he had access to more of it or because he had learned what happened when you treated it carelessly. He sat in the chair beside Harry's bed and produced a paper bag from somewhere in his robes. "Lemon drops," he said. "I'm persistent if nothing else." Harry took one. Solidarity felt appropriate. Dumbledore looked at him, not the evaluative look he sometimes deployed, the one that was reading rather than seeing, but something more direct. Something that had less strategy in it. "How are you feeling?" "Functional," Harry said. "Better than expected given what happened." "Yes." Dumbledore folded his hands in his lap. He was quiet for a moment in the way he was sometimes quiet, not absence of thought but a decision about which thought to begin with. "Quirinus Quirrell was 32 years old," he said. "A brilliant scholar before he went looking for things that found him instead." He looked at the windows. "I underestimated how close to the surface his possession had become. I should not have." Harry looked at him. This was not what he'd expected. "You're telling me you made a mistake." "I'm telling you I made several." Dumbledore's voice was even. Not self-flagellating, not performative, just honest, with the specific honesty of very old people who have stopped seeing the point in dishonesty. "I placed an object of extraordinary power in a school full of children and surrounded it with obstacles that a determined adult could breach in an evening. I relied on the assumption that my precautions would be sufficient." He paused. "You went through them in one night." "We did," Harry said, "with help." "Yes, 3 first years." The blue eyes came back to Harry's face. "You specifically concern me, Harry. In what way?" "In the way that something concerns you when you realize it has been operating outside your model of it." Dumbledore turned his lemon drop over in his fingers. "I had plans, approaches, ways I imagined this would develop over years, the careful cultivation of what you are." He stopped. Then Diana raised you on the Themyscira and arrived at Hogwarts 11 years ahead of my schedule. Harry felt something clarify. You knew she had me. Not immediately. It took me some time to understand where you'd gone. By the time I understood, you were already someone. The old man's voice had something in it that was not regret exactly, but was the close relative of regret. I could have attempted retrieval, I considered it. What stopped you? Dumbledore was quiet. She would have stopped you, Harry said. Yes, she would have, and she would have been right to. He set the lemon drop down on the bedside table. I want you to understand that I am not your enemy, Harry, but I am also not going to pretend that I have no interests in this or that my plans for you have ever been simple. I know, Harry said. He'd known since Christmas, since the library, since the specific quality of Dumbledore's careful attention all year. I don't think you're my enemy. I think you're someone who has been playing a very long game against something that deserves to be opposed, and you've been playing it so long that some of your pieces have started to move without checking in. He held the old man's gaze. I'm not going to be moved without checking in. Something happened in Dumbledore's expression. Complex and layered, the way things were when many different feelings were trying to occupy the same face simultaneously. Your mother, he said, argued with me about strategy every single time we were in the same room. She had the same quality you have, the ability to be completely courteous while being completely immovable. His mouth curved slightly. I found it maddening and invaluable in equal measure. Tell me about them, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. My parents, Harry said, not the story I've read, the people. He kept his voice steady and his eyes on the old man's face. I know you knew them, I know you knew her particularly, tell me something true. Dumbledore was quiet for a long time. Outside, the June afternoon moved through the windows, full of birdsong and cut grass and the distant shouts of students taking advantage of the fine weather in the last weeks of term. Your mother, Dumbledore said, was the most naturally talented witch I taught in 40 years. Not the most technically accomplished, I have had students with finer wand control, more extensive theoretical knowledge. But Lily Evans had an instinct for what magic was at its deepest level that I have encountered perhaps 3 times in a century. He looked at his hands. She was also entirely unimpressed by authority for its own sake, including mine. She told me once in her 6th year that she thought my approach to the order was structured in a way that would get people killed because I was too comfortable with martyrdom as a strategic outcome. A pause. She was right, I didn't listen well enough. Harry held very still. And my father. James was the sort of person who made the room better by being in it, not through effort, not through performance, simply by nature. The old man's voice changed register slightly, became something warmer. He was also reckless and occasionally brilliant and deeply loyal in a way that sometimes bypassed his judgment. He loved your mother with a totality that made other people's love affairs look like committee meetings. A breath. He would have been exceptional, both of them would have been. They were exceptional, Harry said. I didn't know them and I still know that. Yes, Dumbledore looked at him. You are very like her and very unlike her in different measures. The eyes are obvious, everyone will tell you that, and it will become less meaningful the more people say it. What is less obvious is that you inherited her fundamental quality. The way she was, grounded, not in the sense of being unimaginative, in the sense of always knowing where she stood. Harry didn't say anything for a moment. He sat with it, the image of a woman he'd been building all his life from fragments, from other people's words, from the mirror's brief gift at Christmas, from the warmth of magic that had carried his mother's fingerprints all the way into a dungeon to protect him. I found the stone by thinking of putting it somewhere safe, he said. Not of using it. Just moving it out of his reach, it dropped into my hand. Yes, Dumbledore said softly, that is precisely the quality I mean. They sat in a quiet that was different from the beginning of the conversation, less careful, less strategized, more like 2 people who had been introduced through intermediaries and had now actually met. I want to know more, Harry said, about what's coming. Not the whole plan. I understand there are things you're managing that you won't share yet, and I'm not demanding everything at once. But I'm not going to be kept uninformed about my own situation. Oh, Dumbledore said, and there was something like acceptance in it, the specific acceptance of a man revising a long-held assumption. I don't imagine you will be. He stood slowly. Rest, Harry, there will be time, and I suspect more than I suspected a year ago that when the time comes you will be ready. I was ready this time, Harry said. Dumbledore paused at the door. Yes, that is both reassuring and rather terrifying. A brief pause. Lemon drop for the road. Harry looked at the paper bag. Took one, good man, said Dumbledore and left. Snape came that evening, when the hospital wing was fully empty and the sky outside had gone the deep clear blue of a summer night establishing itself. Harry had been expecting this. He'd been expecting it since he'd been conscious enough to think, because there was an accounting to be made between them that neither of them had avoided all year, and that the dungeon events had crystallized into something that now required addressing. Snape came in without ceremony, closing the door behind him, and stood at the foot of Harry's bed with his arms at his sides, and his expression arranged in the particular neutral that took considerable effort to maintain. He looked, Harry thought, like a man who had been up for several days, which he probably had been. The dark eyes were darker at the edges than usual, the black robe slightly less immaculate. Harry waited. "You're alive?" Snape said. His voice was even. "Yes." Snape started again. "The broom in November, it was not." "I know it wasn't you," Harry said. "Hermione thought it was. I corrected her after." Something moved in Snape's expression, not surprise exactly, but an adjustment. "You knew?" "I knew the jinx on my broom didn't come from you, yes. The countercurse you were performing was the thing keeping me on it." He held the professor's gaze steadily. "You've been trying to protect the stone from Quirrell all year. You suspected him from very early on." "From the first week," Snape said, in a tone that suggested this had been its own specific frustration. "I could not prove it. Every time I moved to intercept him, he had already moved." He paused. "I was also constrained by Dumbledore's preference for watching the situation develop." "He watches things develop," Harry said. "It's a pattern." The ghost of something moved across Snape's face that might in different circumstances have been agreement. "You went in there yourself," he said, "through all of it." "Yes, that was extraordinarily reckless." "It was extremely calculated," Harry said without heat. "There's a difference. I knew what was in each room, and I knew what the final confrontation would require, and I knew I was the only person who could end it because the specific nature of my mother's protection was the only thing that had any effect on what was in Quirrell." He looked at Snape directly. "I'm not reckless. I was trained not to be." Snape's jaw tightened fractionally. "By that woman, by Diana of Themyscira, yes." He kept his voice completely even. "Who is extraordinary if you're curious, which you don't have to be." A pause opened up in the room. Harry let it open without rushing to fill it. He'd learned that silences between people who had unfinished things between them were information, that what someone did in a silence told you more than what they'd said going into it. What Snape did was look at the window for a moment with the expression of a man doing something he'd decided to do before he'd quite finished deciding to do it. "Your mother," he said, and stopped. "Yes," Harry said quietly. "I knew her." He said it in the flat, declarative way of someone reciting a fact to keep the surrounding information at a manageable distance. "Before Hogwarts, we were friends." He paused on the word with a precision that suggested it was both accurate and insufficient. "For a time," Harry said nothing. He let the man say what he'd come to say. "I could not save her," Snape said. "I tried, I warned Dumbledore, I acted when I could act, it was not enough." His voice remained even, and it cost him something to keep it even. Harry could see that clearly. "Everything I have done at this school since she died has been, in part, a continuation of the one thing I could do for her, which was ensure her son survived to understand what she sacrificed." "I understand it," Harry said. "You understand it intellectually," Snape said with the precision he brought to the distinction. "You were not there. I was 1 year old." Harry held Snape's gaze. "But I was raised by someone who loved me with exactly that totality, so I understand what it means to have someone burn themselves up for you, the specific weight of it." He paused. "I don't take it for granted, either sacrifice." The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. It had a different quality, less charged, more open. Not warm, Snape did not do warm, but something had shifted in the room's temperature that was not temperature. "You look like your father," Snape said, and for the first time in the year there was no edge in it. Just a statement of fact delivered by someone who had made peace with the fact enough to state it without weaponizing it. "But there are moments," he stopped. "Her eyes," Harry said. He'd heard this often enough that it no longer felt like a gift or a burden, just a fact about his face that connected him to someone he'd never met and always known. "More than the eyes," Snape said. He seemed to have run out of what he came to say and found something unexpected in the space instead and was not entirely sure what to do with it. "Get more rest," he said, returning to the familiar ground of instruction. "Madame Pomfrey's approval to leave will not come faster by your willing it." "She's going to let me out tomorrow," Harry said. "I asked this morning. She told me she'd made no such." "She will," Harry said. Snape looked at him for a moment with the expression of a man who was not going to say how can you possibly know that because the answer would probably be unsettling. He left. He did not say goodbye. Harry didn't expect him to. He sat in the quiet for a while after, looking at the ceiling, holding the weight of the conversation the way he held things he needed to understand before he put them down. Snape was not good, he was not simple. He was a man who had made choices that had broken things irrevocably and who was living inside the breakage, and doing something with it that was not nothing, even if it was not enough. Harry understood broken things. Themyscira was ancient and perfect, and still the women on it carried old damages from old wars, the way people carry old scars, healed over, functional, part of the shape of them. He thought of Diana. He wanted to see her. Madame Pomfrey let him out in the morning with strict instructions about rest and no physical exertion and a dietary list that he accepted with complete courtesy and planned to mostly follow. He went to Gryffindor Tower, got dressed in his own clothes, and on the way down to breakfast passed a window that showed him the grounds, full of students taking advantage of the summer morning. He went outside instead. The lake was still in the early light, the surface mirror flat, the giant squid visible as a dark shape moving in its slow, deliberate way far out from the bank. Harry walked to the water's edge and stood there breathing the morning air, clean and green and cold at the edges, and felt the accumulated weight of the year beginning to settle. It didn't settle quietly. It settled the way real things settle, with the full acknowledgement of their weight before they find their resting place. He was alive. Quirrell was dead. The stone was gone. Voldemort was diminished. Ron had a healed rib he'd gotten because he was Harry's friend and had gotten in the path of a stone knight, and Harry held that fact without flinching, because flinching would be a kind of dishonesty. People who were with you bore the costs of being with you, and you did not pretend otherwise. He sat on the bank and pulled off his shoes and put his feet in the water, which was cold enough to make him catch his breath, and the giant squid detoured 40 feet toward shore out of what Harry had decided was curiosity, because it did this every time he came here and he had decided to take it personally. "Morning," he said to it. A tentacle broke the surface briefly. Probably coincidence. Probably he heard footsteps behind him and didn't turn. He could read footsteps now after a year, and these were Hermione's, quick and purposeful, and behind them Ron's, slightly heavier and more deliberate. They sat beside him on the bank without being invited. This was, he decided, one of the best things about having found the right people, the absence of needing to be invited. Hermione had a letter. She held it out. "Came this morning, it's from her." The writing on the outside was Diana's. Well, he took it. He read it there on the bank with his feet in the cold water and his two best friends on either side of him reading their own versions of the morning in the way good friends do, giving you space inside shared proximity. Diana's letter was 4 pages, long even for her. He read it twice slowly, taking it in the way he took in things from her, not as information but as presence, because Diana's letters were always somehow her, were always the specific and irreducible quality of her attention. She'd heard, of course she'd heard, she had contacts and resources, and an intelligence network that the wizarding world didn't know existed, and would probably find deeply uncomfortable. She'd known before he'd written. The letter she sent was not worried. She didn't write worried letters, not because she didn't feel it, but because she'd always understood that worried letters were for the writer, not the reader. She wrote about the night she'd found him. She'd written about it before in pieces when he'd asked about specific things. But this letter was different, fuller, more complete. She wrote about the house, and the man in the hallway, and his mother on the floor, and the way he'd looked up at her from the crib with eyes that were already assessing the situation. She wrote about the warmth she'd felt in the magic, the specific quality of it, the love that had been so complete it had punched through dimensional space and pulled her there. "I want you to understand something," she wrote near the end of the 3rd page. "I did not take you because I felt sorry for you. Pity is passive. I took you because the moment I saw you I understood, with the absolute clarity I usually reserve for battlefields, that you were something that needed to be in the world at full strength. Whatever your mother had done in that room had made you into something important, and I could see it already in a 1-year-old's grip and a 1-year-old's eyes. You were going to be significant. I wanted you to be equipped for it. And then I kept you because I loved you. That came faster than I expected and stayed more permanently than anything else I have held onto in several thousand years of holding onto things. You found the stone by thinking of moving it out of reach, not of using it. This is exactly what I hoped. Not because using it would have been wrong. Power has legitimate uses and I have never taught you to be afraid of it. But because wisdom and power arriving in the same hand at the same moment is rarer than most people understand, and you have both, and that matters more than you know. Come home for the summer. I have things to tell you that are better said in person, and there is a training sequence Philippus has been holding since March that she will be unbearable about until you complete it. Also, Hippolyta has been asking about you in that way. She has that means she wants to see you but won't say so directly, which is endearing and slightly maddening, and you are the only person I know who can answer her oblique inquiries in a way that satisfies them. I am proud of you. I was always going to be proud of you. But this year specifically, I am proud. Come home. Diana. He folded the letter carefully, the way he folded all her letters, along the existing creases and put it in his chest pocket. Ron was looking at the water with the tactful sideways attention of someone who has not been reading someone else's mail and is not about to comment on the expression on their face. Hermione had her chin on her knees looking at the squid, which had remained in the area with what Harry chose to interpret as moral support. Good letter, Ron said eventually. Very good, Harry said. Your guardian? Hermione asked with the specific careful quality she used for this subject. Yes. Harry looked out at the lake. The morning was fully established now, the sun above the hills, the day beginning its summer business. She wants me home for the holidays. Makes sense, Ron said. After all, he stopped, started again. Is home? He seemed to be looking for the right shape of the question. I mean, home is there still. Always, Harry said. He said it without hesitation because it was one of the truest things he knew. Themyscira is home, Hogwarts is becoming something, they're not the same thing and neither one cancels the other out. Ron considered this. He seemed to find it satisfactory. My mum still wants you at the Burrow, he said. She's mentioned it approximately 400 times since I wrote about you in November. Tell her I'd love to come before I leave, Harry said. Ron's face arranged itself into something very pleased that he wasn't going to make a big deal of. Yeah, he said, she'll like that. I've been thinking, Hermione said, in the particular tone she used when she'd been thinking for a while and had given the thought time to finish developing. About what comes next. Voldemort, Harry said. Yes, he'll try again. Whatever form he's in, whatever state he's in after last night, he will try again. He's been trying to return since 1981, and this is the most he's achieved since then, and even this wasn't enough. She looked at Harry directly. What do you know about what he'll need next time? A body, Harry said, a real one. Whatever he does, wherever he goes, the priority is becoming physical again. He paused. And if he becomes physical, the protection my mother built doesn't apply in the same way. The nature of the sacrifice was specific to what he was, the bodiless thing. A fully embodied Voldemort is a different equation. Then we have time, Hermione said, and we should use it. We should, Harry agreed. I want to research the Horcrux literature, she said. She said the word quietly, with the specific weight of someone who had been looking into something and found the looking uncomfortable. There are references in the restricted section. I haven't accessed them yet, but I know they're there and I think they're relevant. Harry looked at her. She'd been doing her own intelligence gathering quietly in parallel with his over the whole year. This was not surprising. This was completely characteristic. Next year, he said. Next year, she agreed. Ron was looking between them with the expression of someone who has decided he is entirely on board with whatever this is even without knowing all the details yet. Right, he said. Next year. More library time for Hermione, more training things for Harry, and presumably more chess for me, since apparently I'm the chess person. You're excellent at chess, Harry said. I am, Ron said with the complete simplicity of someone who knows exactly one thing they're excellent at and has no need to qualify it. You're also loyal and perceptive and you make good calls under pressure, Hermione said with the directness she occasionally deployed when she thought someone deserved to hear something they wouldn't say about themselves. Ron went slightly pink. Right, he said. Well, he cleared his throat. Good. The giant squid had drifted closer. It was, objectively, hanging around. What do you think it wants? Ron said, looking at it. Company probably, Harry said. Can't it get company from the merpeople? Maybe it prefers us. That's actually really nice, Ron said. He seemed surprised by this conclusion. Depressing but nice, Harry laughed. The laugh came easily, the way it always came when he was with them, not performed, not careful, just real. The full one, the loud one. The one that Philippus had told him once in a letter that was 3 sentences long, and the most sentimental thing she'd ever committed to paper was the best thing about him. The summer morning held the 3 of them on the bank, and the water was cold on Harry's feet, and the giant squid drifted in its patient orbit. And somewhere above them, the castle was going about its year-end business with the untroubled energy of a place that has sent students home and received them back for 1,000 years, and intends to keep doing so. And Harry sat with his letter in his chest pocket and the year in his chest alongside it, and thought about Themyscira in summer, and Diana on the eastern cliffs at sunset, and Hippolyta's hands on his face, and Philippus with a training sequence she'd been holding since March with that particular quality of anticipation she had when she thought something was going to be excellent. He thought about what Dumbledore had said, maddening and invaluable in equal measure. He thought about what Snape hadn't quite said and had said anyway. He thought about Quirrell, 32 years old, brilliant, destroyed by something he'd gone looking for. He thought about his mother burning herself up in a doorway, and the warmth of it reaching across a dungeon 10 years later and burning back. He thought about Voldemort diminished, retreating, finding another dark corner to gather himself in, the way terrible things always found dark corners, and he held the thought without fear, without bravado, just the clean, honest knowledge of someone who has met the thing that opposes them and has taken its measure. Not finished. Not even close to finished. But not afraid. He put his feet in the cold water and watched the squid and was, for this specific morning, entirely present. Diana had taught him this too, that presence was not passivity, that being fully in the current moment while preparing for the next one was the highest form of readiness, that the warrior who could not be still was always slightly behind their own actions. He was still, he was ready. The summer was coming, and after the summer, everything else. He was ready for all of it. Chapter 6. What the Shore Remembers. The Hogwarts Express left at 11. Harry was on the platform at 10:15, which gave him 45 minutes of watching things. Families arriving in gradual waves, trunks being hauled, owls complaining. The twins Weasley conducting some kind of final transaction near the rear carriages that involved a handshake, a wrapped package, and two fifth-years who left looking simultaneously pleased and slightly nervous about it. Fred caught Harry watching and gave him a salute of such cheerful transparency that Harry returned it without thinking. He'd spent the final week of term in the way he spent most things, attending to the layers of it. Exams completed, scores returned. He'd done well in everything, exceptionally in defense and charms, which surprised no one who paid attention and seemed to surprise everyone who decided to have an opinion without paying attention. Hermione had topped the year in 4 subjects and argued with the result in a 5th because she believed the marking rubric was insufficiently precise, which was both characteristic and probably correct. Ron had passed everything, which he announced at breakfast with the specific satisfaction of someone who had set a realistic goal and met it through genuine effort. The end-of-year feast had awarded the House Cup to Gryffindor, which produced noise from the Gryffindor table that was considerably out of proportion to the event. Harry had clapped and eaten a large amount of excellent food and felt, sitting in the candlelit hall for the last time this year, the particular quality of an ending that was also a between, not finished, not abandoned, just paused. The castle around him felt different at the feast than it had in September, and he understood that the difference was in him. Hogwarts hadn't changed. He had simply learned enough of its language to hear it properly. McGonagall had stopped him after the feast, in the corridor outside the Great Hall. She had stood with her hands clasped and looked at him with the expression she used when she was about to say something she decided on, but that still required precision to deliver correctly. "Next year," she said, "I would like you to consider the possibility of positions of responsibility within your house." "Prefect," he said. "Eventually, there are other roles." She paused. "You have a quality that I do not often encounter in first-year students, perhaps any year students." Another pause in which she seemed to be deciding how much of the statement to complete. "The ability to make people want to follow you without making them feel led." He thought about this. "I'll consider it," he said genuinely. "See that you do." She started to turn away and then didn't. "You handled yourself this year with considerable distinction, not solely in the obvious events." She looked at him with the directness that was her mode at the highest register of sincerity. "Your mother would have been, your mother would be." She stopped, corrected herself. "Your mother is proud, I believe that for what it's worth." "It's worth a great deal," Harry said. "Thank you, Professor." She had nodded with the brisk efficiency of someone who had said what needed saying and was moving on, and swept away down the corridor. And Harry had stood there for a moment holding the gift of what she'd said before carrying it down to join the others. Now he stood on platform 9 3/4 with his trunk at his feet and Nyx on his shoulder, because she'd refused her cage this morning with a conviction he decided to respect, and waited for 11 o'clock. Ron appeared at his elbow with 10 minutes to spare, slightly breathless, with a smear of something blue on his left ear that was probably ink and definitely not going to be mentioned. "Mum's waiting," he said. "On the other side, she's going to want to look. She's going to be a lot. About you specifically, I'm warning you." "I appreciate the warning," Harry said. "She knows she knows you don't have that your situation is." Ron was doing the thing where he navigated towards something difficult with honesty and care, which Harry had come to find one of his most valuable qualities. "She's been reading about you in the Prophet since I wrote home in November, and she has feelings about it." Feelings. Capital F, the kind where food is involved. "I look forward to it," Harry said and meant it. Hermione materialized from the crowd with her parents, who were tall and slightly overwhelmed in the way non-magical people were slightly overwhelmed by a magical platform, and dealing with it by focusing on practical things. Her mother was holding the strap of Hermione's bag with the particular grip of a parent who has learned that this is sometimes the best way to maintain proximity. Her father was reading the station board with the expression of someone who knows it has no useful information for him and is reading it anyway. "Mum, Dad," Hermione said, "this is Harry." Hermione's mother looked at Harry with the assessing warmth of someone who had been hearing about this person since September and was now performing a rapid cross-reference between account and reality. "We've heard a great deal about you," she said. "All of it good," Harry said. "Mostly analytical," her father said, with a dry quality that explained where Hermione's dry quality had come from. Harry liked them immediately. They talked for a few minutes on the platform, easy, genuine conversation, Hermione's parents asking reasonable questions about the school year, and Harry answering them in the way he always answered questions from people who deserved direct answers, which was directly. He watched Hermione watching this and noted the particular pleased quality she was trying not to show. "We'll write over the summer," Hermione said when the whistle did its first advisory call. I'm going to be hard to reach for part of July, Harry said, but yes, and I want those restricted section notes when term starts. I'll have them organized by subject and cross-referenced, she said in the tone of someone describing a thing they were going to enjoy doing. Of course you will. She hugged him, brief, firm, matter-of-fact, the kind of hug that said everything it needed to without making a production of saying it. He returned it the same way. Ron hugged him next, longer, with the slightly chaotic energy of someone who was better at physical affection than verbal and knew it. Don't do anything interesting without us, he said into Harry's shoulder. I'll try, Harry said. You won't, Ron said accurately. They boarded the train. Harry stood on the platform and watched it go, the red engine building steam, the carriages filling with faces at windows, his two best friends visible in one of the middle ones, Ron's hand raised in a wave, Hermione's expression doing something complicated that resolved into a smile when she saw him looking. He watched until the train was gone. Then he turned and walked back through the barrier. Diana was on the other side. She was standing near the wall, slightly apart from the crowd of non-magical parents and families, which was where Diana tended to stand in crowds, adjacent to them, reading them, never quite folded into the texture of the ordinary. She was in her version of civilian clothes, which was still considerably more striking than most people's anything, and she was watching the barrier with the focused quality she brought to all waiting, not impatient, not passive, but fully attentive. When Harry came through the barrier, she didn't move toward him immediately. She did the thing she'd always done when he came back from something. She looked at him first, reading the full picture of him, taking in everything the year had done to the shape he presented to the world. It was the look of someone who had learned to see past the surface of things and had applied this specifically, and for a long time, to the project of understanding him. Then she crossed the distance. He met her halfway and she pulled him in with the specific quality of an embrace that had none of the careful management of public displays. Full and present and warm, her hand against the back of his head the way it had been since he was small, the familiar geography of her that meant safety in the oldest and most non-negotiable part of his nervous system. He held on. He didn't say anything for a moment. Neither did she. There was too much in the year that had just closed, too much weight and too much significance to begin with words. The words could come when they were somewhere quieter. You're taller, she said finally against his hair. I had a growth spurt in February, he said. I wrote you about it. You wrote me one sentence about it. It was not adequate. It was a very informative sentence. She pulled back and held his face in both hands and looked at him the way Hippolyta had at the farewell feast, the same gesture, grandmother and daughter sharing the same quality of attention. Her eyes moved across his face with the thoroughness of someone who has learned to read it over years and is updating the reading. The scar, she said. It hurt when it needed to and then stopped. Your hands, healed, the rest of you, present and functional and already thinking about next year. She looked at him for another moment. Then she made the sound she made when she'd completed an assessment and found the result satisfactory, not relief, because Diana managed expectation too well for relief, but something adjacent to it, the sound of a held breath releasing. Come on, she said. I want to hear everything, not the letter version, the full version. It'll take a while. We have the whole drive and the flight and several days before Philippus gets hold of you. She picked up his trunk as if it weighed nothing, which to her it didn't. Start with the chess game. Ron's letters to his mother have already reached me through 3 separate sources, and the chess game sounds extraordinary. Harry started with the chess game. They flew commercial as far as Athens, which Diana did with the practiced, slightly resigned quality of someone who had made peace with the fact that appearing out of thin air in the Athenian countryside drew considerably more attention than a connecting flight from Heathrow. Harry used the flight to finish telling her the year, filling in the pieces he'd left out of letters, the texture of things that didn't compress into written words. She listened the way she always listened, completely, without interrupting except to ask specific questions that showed she'd been tracking everything. When he told her about Quirrell and the final chamber, she was very still, the way she went still for things that mattered. When he told her about holding on, about breathing through the white light, about the sound of something tearing loose, she looked at her hands briefly and then back at him. The protection held, she said, more than held, it worked offensively, it didn't just repel, it acted. Because you were active, Diana said. A passive shield protects, but you initiated contact. You made it directional. She was quiet for a moment. Your mother built something extraordinary and you used it correctly. I didn't know it would work until it did. The best operations never do, she said, which was the most Diana sentence that had ever been said, and he told her so. It's true, she said unapologetically. He looked at the clouds outside the plane window. Tell me what you know, he said, about what comes next. You know things, I know you know things. I know some things, she said carefully. There are limits. The wizarding world is not opaque to me but not fully transparent. I have contacts who provide information, but Dumbledore plays his cards close and some of what's coming is tied to magic I don't fully understand. But you have a picture. I have a rough map. She turned in her seat to face him more directly. Voldemort is not finished, you know this. Yes, what happened in that dungeon set him back significantly. He was already diminished, barely existing, parasitic, dependent on hosts and circumstances. Whatever your mother's protection did when you made contact, it dissolved what he'd rebuilt this year. He'll need time, months, maybe more. She held his gaze. But time is the one resource he's willing to be patient about. He has been patient before. He needs a body, Harry said. Yes. And he'll need to rebuild followers. The Death Eaters who survived the First War are living in the world as free people, some through genuine defection, some through claiming coercion, some through Dumbledore's willingness to allow reintegration for the sake of peace. She paused. That peace will become complicated when he returns. Draco's father, Harry said. Diana looked at him. Lucius Malfoy, she said. Yes, he's a significant figure. He was a significant figure in the First War, and he has spent the years since consolidating influence in places that will matter when the balance shifts. She paused. Draco. I've been thinking about Draco, Harry said. Tell me what you've thought. Harry looked at the tray table for a moment, ordering it. He's a product of everything his father wanted to produce, the contempt, the hierarchy, the performance of superiority. But he's 11. He's been in it 11 years and that's not nothing, but it's also not calcified, not yet. He paused. He watches me, I've noticed it all year, not with the hostility he shows publicly, something more complicated. He can't understand you, Diana said. You don't fit the framework he's been given for understanding people like you. People like me, famous, powerful, the natural center of a room. She said it without flattery, the way she said factual things. His framework says you should be aligned with him because power aligns with power. His framework says you should fear what his father represents. Neither of those things is true and he can see that and it's breaking his model. So what do I do with him? Nothing deliberate, Diana said. Don't try to reform him, that's not your role and it's not your responsibility. Just continue being what you are. The most consistent pressure on a bad framework is the prolonged existence of a good counterexample. Harry looked at her. You've been thinking about him. I've been thinking about everyone you've described to me, she straightened. You described him in your third letter. In the fourth you mentioned him 3 times without noting that you'd mentioned him. In the fifth, all right, Harry said, I take the point. You don't need to solve Draco Malfoy, but you're right to keep looking. He nodded. Outside the window the clouds had broken and below them the Aegean was visible, blue and ancient, scattered with islands. He could feel the pull of it already, the specific gravity of the Mediterranean at this latitude, the smell of the sea even through the sealed aircraft pressure. He always felt it at this stage of the journey home, the island calling. Mother, he said. She looked at him. Thank you for the last letter. He held her gaze steadily because this deserved steadiness. What you wrote about the night you found me. She was quiet for a moment. I meant it. I know, that's why I'm thanking you, he paused. I've been thinking about it all week, about what you wrote, that you kept me because you loved me, that it came faster than you expected. It did. No qualification, no management of the statement, just Diana telling the truth, which she was constitutionally incapable of not doing. What was it, he asked, the specific thing I've always wanted to ask? She considered it seriously. He'd asked her things before that others might have deflected with sentiment or simplicity, and she'd always taken the question seriously and tried to answer it honestly. This was no different. Your grip, she said finally. You grabbed my thumb in the crib when I picked you up, and I've held swords and shields and kept my grip through things that would have made most people let go, and nothing has ever held on quite the way you held on. She looked at him. You'd been through something no child should survive, and you were 1 year old, and you grabbed my thumb like you'd decided I was the right option, and you were not revising that decision. She paused. How could I not love something that decided that about me? Harry looked at her. He felt the full weight of it, the decade of it, the specific shape of what she'd built him into, from that grip in a crib to this conversation at 30,000 feet. Good call on my part, he said. She laughed, the real one. He'd made her laugh on planes before, and the people around them always looked, because it was a remarkable sound, Diana laughing genuinely, full and warm and completely unself-conscious. The laugh of someone who had lived long enough to know that joy was a form of strength and had no interest in moderating it. He laughed with her. Below them, the Aegean shone. Themyscira appeared the way it always appeared, gradually, then all at once. The specific magic of the island's wards resolving the coast into clarity as they came in low over the water. Harry had been coming home to this site his whole life, and it had never become ordinary. The white cliffs, the harbor, the high towers of the palace catching the late afternoon light, the green inland hills with their orchards and training fields, the long curve of the eastern beach where the sand was so fine it moved like water. He felt his shoulders drop. He felt, specifically, the release of a tension he'd been carrying for 9 months without fully noticing, the way you don't notice the weight of something until the moment you set it down. Philippus was on the harbor dock. She stood with her arms crossed, and her expression arranged in the particular configuration Harry had known his whole life. Stern because she believed in sternness, warm because she couldn't entirely suppress it, and trying to maintain the balance of both while looking at someone she'd last seen in September. She was in her armor, which she wore the way most people wore skin, and she looked exactly as she always looked, which was like something ancient and formidable that had decided to be patient with the world without making any promises about how long the patience would last. Harry jumped down from the boat before it had fully tied up, which was a thing she'd told him not to do when he was 8 and which he'd been doing anyway ever since, and crossed the dock to her. She put both hands on his shoulders and looked at him with the evaluative thoroughness of a trainer assessing a student returned from their first real field deployment. She moved her hands to his arms, checking structure. She looked at his hands, healed, but she could read the old record of them if she knew what she was looking for, and she always knew what she was looking for. Sloppy, she said. He stared at her. I defeated a Dark Lord. I've seen the account. The contact technique was improvised and it worked, but if the target had been faster, the grip on the wrist wouldn't have been sufficient. She released him. We'll spend 2 weeks refining your close contact offensive approach. A beat. You did well. From Philippus, this was an oration. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me, I taught you. Your performance reflects my teaching. She turned toward the path. Come. Hippolyta is waiting, and she won't start dinner until you've appeared, and she won't admit she won't start dinner until you've appeared, and we've been eating late for the last week because of it. Harry fell into step beside her. The dock boards were warm under his feet. He'd pulled his shoes off the moment they hit the island's waters, another thing Philippus had opinions about and had stopped vocalizing. The air smelled of salt and thyme and the particular warm stone smell of the island in summer, a smell that was so completely itself that walking into it was like walking back into a word you knew the full meaning of. Tell me the chess game, Philippus said. You read about it. I read the letters, now I want to hear it. She paused. The Weasley boy, he played himself into a position of sacrifice to open the path. Yes, and he knew he was doing it. Completely made the decision before I could say anything. Philippus was quiet for 3 steps. Good material, she said. Hippolyta's court was different from Dumbledore's office and different from McGonagall's classroom and different from the dungeon chambers and different from the hospital wing. It was older than all of them by a margin that made comparison faintly absurd. The ceiling was open to the sky. The palace's great hall had been built without a roof in the central section deliberately, because Hippolyta had always said that any court that couldn't withstand weather had already compromised something essential. The evening sky above was going from blue to violet, the first stars coming through. Harry sat in his usual place at the Queen's table, not the formal seat of honor, which was for diplomats and visiting dignitaries, but the seat beside Hippolyta's right hand that had been his since he was old enough to sit at the table without assistance. The feast around him was in full summer form, long tables, the whole court, the particular celebratory quality that Themyscira gave to returns, because the Amazons had always understood that safe returns were the best reason to celebrate. Hippolyta had greeted him in the private way in the antechamber with her hands on his face and no audience. She'd looked at him for a long time. She'd said in the old tongue, you did what you were trained for, which from Hippolyta was everything. Now she sat beside him and ate and occasionally spoke to the ambassador on her left and occasionally spoke to Harry in the measured way she distributed her attention at formal dinners, fairly, deliberately, never leaving anyone uncertain of their position in her regard. But at one point she turned to him specifically with the quality she reserved for things she'd been waiting to say. The world you return to, she said, tell me what it is. Complicated, he said. Layered. Old in the way that human institutions are old, full of habit and hierarchy and things that calcified before anyone thought to question them. He paused. Also full of people worth knowing. People with gifts I don't have. Ron sees strategy in 3 dimensions. Hermione processes information faster than anyone I've met outside of this island. Even the people I don't like have things in them worth understanding. Draco, Hippolyta said. He'd written her about Draco too, he remembered. Yes, he's been shaped into something, it's not finished yet. No, she said, he's 11, nothing is finished at 11. She looked at the open sky. How did it feel? To face the thing that killed your parents? He considered this carefully, because Hippolyta asked careful questions and deserved careful answers. Not the way I expected, he said. I expected, I don't know, more. The fear that makes people stop speaking his name, the weight everyone else gives to the encounter. He shook his head. It was just something I needed to do, and I had what I needed to do it, and I did it. You were not afraid. I'm always capable of being afraid, he said, repeating what he'd told Hermione. I decided not to be. Hippolyta looked at him with the specific look she had that meant she was seeing past the surface of a thing. There is a difference, she said slowly, between not being afraid and not allowing fear to function. You allowed nothing. He met her eyes. Should I have? I don't know, she said honestly. I have been a queen for 3,000 years and I am still not certain whether the capacity for fear serves us or simply costs us. She was quiet for a moment. What I know is that it did not cost you. And that in the next encounter, because there will be a next encounter, you should be prepared for something harder. Something that will try to find the thing fear would reach, even if this encounter couldn't. He held this. It was the thing beneath all of Diana's training and all of Philippus's drills and all of Ayla's scholarship, not the assumption of invulnerability, but the development of depth, so that when something reached for what was underneath, you had enough of it to withstand the reach. He said, my mother said something similar to what I said, Harry told her, before he killed her. Hippolyta's face did not change in any visible way, but something in the quality of her stillness changed. What did you say? That he was a long, elaborate failure. A man so afraid of death he broke himself trying to escape it and became incomplete. That power wasn't what he was. Hippolyta looked at him for a long moment. She would have said exactly that, she said, exactly those words. Harry looked at the stars coming through the open ceiling. He didn't say anything for a moment. He let the image form the way it sometimes formed, his mother, young and red-haired and with his eyes, standing in a doorway with everything she had behind her and the willingness to spend it all. I know, he said. The first week of summer was uncomplicated in the best way. He ran the training sequences Philippus had been holding. They were demanding and specific, and targeted the gaps the year had revealed: close contact work, reading opponents who were simultaneously magical and physical, operating with compromised visibility in enclosed spaces. He came out of each session bruised and satisfied in the way he was always satisfied after work that pushed him. He swam every morning in the eastern cove, long sessions in the deep warm water, letting the sea do what the sea did, restore things, clear things, return things to their essential structure. He'd been a strong swimmer since before he could remember, the island's waters having been his earliest and most reliable companion. In the water, he felt the specific relaxation of someone returned to their natural element, the year's accumulated complications dissolving behind him in the current. He spent 2 evenings in the library with Ayla, who wanted to talk about the Philosopher's Stone from a historical and theoretical perspective, and who had, he was not surprised to find, considerable knowledge of Nicholas Flamel and the stone's alchemical tradition, and the relationship between alchemy and the kind of magic that had been practiced on Themyscira in the island's early centuries. The protection your mother created, Ayla said on the second evening, rolling a scroll with the careful hands of someone for whom texts were living things. Love is magic, not metaphorical love, actual love, the specific thing converted through sacrifice into a durable force. This is very old, pre-wizarding old, she looked at him. This island has records of it. Show me, Harry said. She showed him 3 texts, in languages that Harry could partially read and partially couldn't, and translated the relevant sections in her precise, annotated way. He read them with his full attention and took notes and asked questions, and came away 2 hours later with a deeper understanding of what had happened in that room in Godric's Hollow and why. His mother had not simply cast a spell. She had made herself into a counter-enchantment. The love she felt, distilled and given everything she had embedded itself in him as a living thing, not a ward that could be broken, but an ongoing force that was dependent on the same principle that had created it. Voldemort could never possess something that was the direct product of everything he had abandoned. The more completely he had abandoned love, the more completely he would be destroyed by contact with its purest form. It would not last forever. It was already fading, had been fading since the night it was created, thinning as Harry grew and changed and became his own thing separate from the sacrifice that had made him. By the time Voldemort had a real body and real power again, the specific protection might be substantially diminished. He held this knowledge and didn't flinch from it. Good, he thought. Then it'll have to be me, not her, he wrote Hermione about it. A long letter, detailed, with references to the Themysciran texts so she could look for parallel sources in the restricted section when term started. He wrote Ron a shorter letter about the training, and included a description of a particularly impressive sparring session with Philippus that had ended with both of them on the ground laughing, which was not a common Philippus outcome, and which he knew Ron would find deeply satisfying. Ron's letter back came in 4 days and was enthusiastic and full of Burrow news and ended with, Mum has been telling everyone who comes to the house that she met you at King's Cross and you were such a dear boy, which I know would make you uncomfortable, so I'm definitely telling you. Harry wrote back, tell her I said thank you for the pumpkin pasties she sent with you on the train. They were excellent and she did not need to do that, and it was exactly the right thing. Ron's next letter, she cried, I'm blaming you. Hermione's letter, when it came, was 11 pages and had 2 separate organizational schemes and a bibliography. Harry read all 11 pages twice and made his own annotations in the margins and sent it back with responses on the back of each page, which he suspected she would either love or find infuriating, and was prepared for either. On the last evening of July, his birthday, which the island treated as a full occasion because Hippolyta treated all occasions as full occasions, and because his birthday had been a feast day on Themyscira since his second year when Hippolyta had declared it one and no one had suggested otherwise, Harry sat with Diana on the eastern cliffs. This was where they always ended up, when the day's formality was done. The eastern cliffs at sunset were theirs in the specific way that certain places became specific people's through years of returning to them. The rock was warm from the day's sun. Below them the sea was doing the evening thing, going gold and then red and then the deep violet blue of a summer Mediterranean dusk. "You've been processing," Diana said. "All month," he said, and I'm ready for next year." He looked at the water. "Not in the way I was ready at the start of this year. I knew things, technically, I'd prepared, but it was all theoretical. Now it's not theoretical." "You've met him," Diana said, "the diminished version of him." "Yes. And I understand why people are afraid." He paused, getting this exact. "It's not the power, it's the completeness of it. He's given everything over to this one drive. There's nothing left in him that could stop himself. That's genuinely terrifying. Most threats have a limiting factor, something they won't do, something they care about beyond the goal. He doesn't. Which makes him predictable," Diana said. "Yes." He looked at her. "In a year or 2 or 5, when he's back, what comes will be completely committed. No hesitation, no limit, no self-preservation that outranks the objective." He was quiet for a moment. "So the counter has to be the opposite of that. Not matching the completeness of commitment, that road leads somewhere I don't want to go, but having something he doesn't and can't have." Diana waited. "Everything else," Harry said, "the things he carved out of himself to become what he is, every limit he discarded." He looked at his hands in his lap, the healed hands, his mother's delivery mechanism. Ron sacrificing his position on the board. Hermione standing in a corridor working out a logic puzzle with the calm she's developed because she trusts the method even when everything's wrong. You, that night in Godric's Hollow, picking up a stranger's child because the warmth in the magic said come here. He looked at Diana. Those are the things he can't access. Those are the things that have beaten him twice now. Diana was very still, looking at him with an expression that had something in it he didn't always see. Something that was not the composed dignity she wore in public or even the genuine warmth she showed in private, but something older than both of them, the specific quality of someone who has been watching the world for a very long time and has occasionally, in the full span of that time, seen something that exceeds their expectations. "Yes," she said, quietly. "That's it. That's exactly it." "My mother knew," Harry said. "She understood it completely. She used it completely." "She did. I'm going to use it too." He said it without drama, the way he stated things he decided on fully. "Not the same way. I can't die for this and I wouldn't be the delivery mechanism for that particular magic anyway, and it's fading, but the principle." He looked at the water. "Keep everything he discarded, treat it as armament." Diana sat with him in the warm evening quiet and said nothing, which was its own answer. After a while she said, "What do you want for next year?" "More," he said immediately. "More of what this year was, more of the work, the classes, the friendship of it, Ron and Hermione." He paused. "Answers about my parents. Dumbledore has more and I'll get it out of him eventually." He smiled. "More Quidditch. Wood wrote to me," Diana said. "He sounds deranged." "He is, but in a productive way. He described your flying at considerable length. Did you have opinions?" "I always have opinions." She glanced at him sideways. "Your left shoulder dips in the extended dive. Philippus noticed it from your description. She's added a corrective sequence to the autumn training." "Of course she has," Harry said. "You'll be extraordinary at it. You already are." She said this without softness, just as the fact it was. "You're extraordinary at most things. I need you to understand that this doesn't make anything easier." "I know," he said. "It just means the things that are hard are the real ones." "Yes," she looked at the sea. "The real hard things are coming." "I know that too." And he thought about the dungeon and the white light and the stone in his hand and Ron against the wall saying go and finish this, and Hermione with her logic and her fire in the stands, and Dumbledore's eyes revising their model of him. He thought about Snape saying your mother in a hospital wing and not being able to finish the sentence and not needing to. He thought about Quirrell, brilliant and destroyed, and he held that too without looking away. He thought about Voldemort in a dark corner somewhere, gathering himself patient, the way terrible things were patient because they had already decided that time was not an obstacle. He thought about his mother in a doorway. He thought about Diana on this cliff at sunset every evening of his childhood that had ended here, the rock warm beneath them and the sea going from gold to red to violet blue. "And I'll be ready," he said. Diana reached over and put her hand over his on the warm rock. "I know," she said. They sat until the last of the light was gone and the stars were fully out above Themyscira, old and cold and innumerable. The same stars that had watched this island for thousands of years and would keep watching long after the specific dramas of this decade had resolved into history. Below them, the sea moved as it had always moved, patient, enormous, carrying everything that had ever been committed to it. The shore remembered. It always did. Harry sat in the dark beside the woman who had found him in a broken house and carried him across the world to this cliff. And he felt the year that had just closed settling fully into the shape of his past, and he felt the year ahead pressing forward at the edge of the dark, full of things he couldn't yet see but that he was not afraid of. He was the son of Lily and James Potter. He was the ward of Diana of Themyscira. He was 11 years old and had already looked into red eyes and held on. Whatever came next would find him ready. Whatever came next would find him here, grounded, clear-eyed, armed with every soft and formidable thing that the boy who had grabbed a stranger's thumb in a crib had been built into. The sea moved. The stars held. Harry Potter watched the water and waited for morning.